Chapter 2010. Profit from a Disaster. Ling Han cursed internally, and hurriedly ducked back into the Black Tower. Ugh! He groaned lowly. He had indeed entered into the Black Tower, but he had still been swept a little by the Celestial King Tier aura, causing at least 90% of the bones in his body to break, and they were all shattered at that. Too terrifying. The attack of the Celestial King had not hit him at all, but merely being swept by the aura had caused the physique that Ling Han had been so proud of to fully crumble. This was what a Celestial King was. The pinnacle of all. Every casual movement represented the Tao of heaven and earth. Ling Han. The Empress and the others hurriedly gathered around him. Ling Han exhaled heavily and said through clenched teeth, "I'm fine. I won't die from this." "You still say that you're fine, but even your D***CK is destroyed." Hu Niu's expression was filled with grief. "Whoa. Stupid Ling Han, you haven't had babies with Niu yet." "Fuck, where are your eyes looking?" Ling Han hurriedly channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid. Usually, when this drop of indestructible true fluid was channeled, his injury should immediately recover in a very short amount of time, yet they did not do so now. Though he had just been slightly grazed by a Celestial King's aura, the martial intent of a Celestial King was still contained within. If it was not erased, even the indestructible true fluid could do nothing. After all, there was too large a disparity in the level of both sides. What kind of Celestial King is this, to actually ambush a few dividing soul tears? Ling Han ridiculed. It could only be said that a Celestial King's patience was really too good. Who knew how many epochs he had been alive for? To him, waiting 100 years, 1,000 years, or even 1,000,000 years was nothing. It could not be said to pass in a snap of the fingers, but it was still no big deal. In comparison, the patience of Ling Han and his party was too poor. "I will heal my injuries first." Ling Han sat down at one side, and stimulated the power of the Black Tower, trying to erase the willpower of the Celestial King. This was too difficult. What was a Celestial King? That was an existence that stood at the pinnacle of great Tao. Even if Ling Han possessed the Black Tower, erasing the willpower of a Celestial King was still as difficult as ascending the heavens. He endlessly fought with this streak of Celestial King tier willpower, commencing a tug of war inside his body, and making progress only with great difficulty. If this had not been inside the Black Tower, and if it had not been for the fact that he cultivated the indestructible Heaven Scroll, which overwhelmed Celestial King tier in terms of level, there would have been absolutely no possible way that he could expel the Celestial King tier willpower. He would only be slowly obliterated by the latter. If it was not so overbearing, how could a Celestial King be qualified to be called as a Celestial King, and stand at the pinnacle of Tao? Ling Han forgot all else, and concentrated on resisting the Celestial King tier willpower. 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 100 years. Time passed quickly, and 100,000 years had passed inside the Black Tower, and Ling Han had finally gotten the upper hand. He had not achieved victory in this war, but merely gotten the upper hand. He finally knew how he should deal with the Celestial King tier willpower, and what made him even more pleasantly surprised was that through this kind of tug of war, his application of regulations had become even more meticulous and proficient. He had a feeling that his present battle prowess was definitely much stronger than it had been 100 years ago. Firstly, it was because his cultivation level had increased, and secondly, his grasp of regulations had reached a meticulous and detailed extent. Only in that manner would he be able to clearly understand the profound mysteries of the Celestial King tier willpower, and be able to expel it. Of course, this was only a streak of aura from a Celestial King. If he had really been struck, then no matter how detailed his grasp of regulations was, it would have been completely ineffective. Ling Han continued to resist this streak of willpower, and time passed swiftly. 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, and Ling Han finally opened his eyes once more. A whole 500,000 years had passed within the Black Tower. The Celestial King tier willpower had finally dispersed completely. It really was troublesome. A whole 600 years, and the time inside the Black Tower was 600,000 years even, and only then did he manage to expel a streak of martial intent. "Ling Han, are you fine now?" Hu Niu and the other women all approached. Ling Han nodded and said, "I'm fine now, and I can be considered to have profited from this disaster." His cultivation level had already reached late-stage Yang Soul. This was a genuine improvement, and the improvement that could not be seen was his practical use of regulations. The present he was a little like Ji Wuming. He clearly was at the same cultivation level as his peers, yet could drive others to despair. Don't know if that detestable guy has left or not, Hunyo said with a pout. He might not have left, but we have encountered a considerable number of huge waves in these several centuries, so we should have left that area far behind. Even the divine sense of a celestial king can only cover a limited area. We should have exited that area. Ling Han exited the Black Tower, preparing himself to flee immediately, but after waiting for half a day, the sea was still completely tranquil, and no one made a move to attack him. Wang! A large ship suddenly appeared in the distance, rapidly heading in his direction. Ling Han looked closely, and saw that there was a flag raised on the large ship. The flag held a falcon that fluttered in the wind, and looked very lifelike. This was a merchant ship. The boundless sea was not a dead area. Instead, there would be frequent merchant ships traveling to and fro. Though it was very dangerous, the profit was also extremely high. In the boundless seas, there were basically no rumors about pirates appearing. The danger mostly came from itself. There were too many powerful living creatures here, and some of them could even make celestial kings frown. Thus, those traveling merchants that dared to do business on the boundless seas had to have elites acting as their protective escort. Young man, come on board. When the large ship passed him, it did not stop. Instead, a rope was thrown over, and just stopped a foot away in front of Ling Han. Ling Han stretched out a hand to grab it, and pulled strongly. Then, his whole person flew forwards, and he landed steadily on the deck. Was your merchant ship attacked by a Sea King class? There was a large man standing on the deck, and the other end of the rope was grasped in his hand. In the boundless seas, those powerful immortal beasts that had reached Celestial King tier would be called Sea King class. Ling Han thought for a moment, and then replied, more or less. 2 Celestial Kings could also be considered Sea King class, right? If the Ink Poison King and the 7 Clouds King knew, they would definitely be fuming with rage. He had actually compared them to vicious beasts of the sea that lacked intelligence. Wasn't that mocking them? We are going to the Western Celestial Realm. If you are heading that way too, then we'll allow you to hitch a ride. However, there is no free lunch in this world. You would have to power the formation every day, and this will be considered your travel fee, the large man said. All right. Ling Han agreed. The large man arranged a room for him, and Ling Han would go to the bottom of the large ship, powering the formation every day with the other sailors, and exerting a driving force for the ship. After several days, Ling Han had also gotten familiar with all the sailors. This merchant ship belonged to the Qin clan, and the Qin clan was an ascending origin tier level force. The Qin clan had a total of 11 large-scale merchant ships, and every merchant ship would have an ascending origin tier great elite standing guard. Chapter 2011. Super Tsunami. Ling Han sighed in relief. Ultimately, he was not a great bringer of calamity that would constantly attract all kinds of enemies. But thinking further, did natural disasters not count? He was very depressed. Could it be that there was not one time when he could just peacefully travel, have a meal, or take a nap? Everyone on the ship started moving. Those that had to go on the deck went, those that were to go to the helm went, and they were all making preparations to meet the tsunami. Ling Han also arrived at the deck. Casting his gaze further, he saw that a massive wave as tall as 30 kilometers had shockingly appeared ahead of them, and it was presently crashing down in their direction. And amidst the wave, he could also clearly see multiple seals rippling and glowing. Thus, this was not an ordinary large wave, but was the equivalent of an overwhelming blow from an elite. At least ascending origin tier in level. Ling Han stared at those seals for a while, and immediately came to a conclusion. To ask him to determine the cultivation level of someone that was stronger than himself was very difficult, but the seals of Great Tao could not be clearer. They could directly reflect the strength of an attack. This was definitely ascending origin tiers level. If Ling Han were to simply approach just like that, he would probably be crushed to pieces directly. Quick, everyone stimulate the protective formation, someone called out loudly from the sidelines. Ling Han also leaped over. Since he had already boarded their ship, he naturally had to do his duty now that they had encountered danger. There was only a protective formation on the ship, but there were more than a dozen formation eyes, through which one could input origin power and activate the might of the formation. Ling Han did not keep anything reserved, and put his all into it. Wang, this formation eye immediately lit up. Wang, Wang, Wang. The formation eyes lit up one after another, and the protective formation of the ship had also been activated, forming an oval-shaped shield of light. Pang, the waves assaulted, heavily slamming into the light shield, and causing the light shield to tremble for a while. This massive wave was not just a powerful attack, but was also a slam of power of regulations. Boom, boom, boom. The crest of the wave rolled past, and regulations endlessly struck, causing the protective light shield to become weaker and weaker. Boom, this massive wave finally passed completely, and the protective light shield also crumbled completely with a tremor. Thankfully, it was already over. If the protective formation had crumbled just a little bit earlier, they would all have been in big trouble. Yet before they could manage to feel joy, they saw that another massive wave was heading towards them. There was actually another. Everyone was stunned, and hurriedly went off to stimulate the formation again. Wang, with the concentrated and completely unreserved efforts of everyone, the light shield reappeared. Pang! The massive wave hit. The light shield trembled strongly, and looked to be on the brink of crumbling at any time. This time they were also very lucky. The protective formation had crumbled after the large wave had swept over it. But behind this giant wave, there was a third one. Was there no end to it? No one had the time to curse as they once again stimulated the formation. The third time, the fourth time, the fifth time. These tsunami waves were practically endless. One after another came in assault, as if they would never stop. When more than 700 massive waves had swept over them, everyone was panting in fatigue, almost about to sprawl out in their weariness. Even if they were all celestials, they could not bear such expense, but for the sake of their lives, they had no choice but to expend themselves time after time. Those that had alchemical pills ingested them with all their might. Even if they could only recover just a bit of origin power, it was better than nothing. 800, 900, 1, 000. The massive waves came endlessly. Someone collapsed due to exhaustion. He had directly passed out. In this way, the pressure on those that were left naturally increased greatly as they would have to cover up for the shortage of that one person. 1,200. 1,400. Pa. Continuously, there would be people collapsing, not just at this formation eye, but also at the other formation eyes. At first, Ling Han wanted to have the Empress and the others come out to give a hand, but he immediately dismissed the idea because there was too much of a gap. The three women would only be like a cup of water poured on a burning cart of firewood, completely incapable of causing any change to the present situation. Furthermore, this was still because there was an ascending origin tier great elite, who had been resisting the tides at the ship's bow. If it were not for the fact that he had dispelled a portion of the power of the waves, this massive ship would have long since been dismantled. Boom, 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 crack. After about 1,500 massive waves crashed down on them, this large ship had also reached its limits and shattered loudly. Instantly, everyone was sent flying. Dive to the seabed, and you all are guaranteed not to die, that ascending origin tier elite shouted loudly. Everyone hurriedly dived because the crest of the next wave was already rapidly approaching. 30 meters? Not enough. 300 meters? Still not enough. 3,000 meters? Just barely. Some had not managed to dive to this depth in time, and when the massive wave swept over, they were instantly crushed into mush. The crest of a wave that contained ascending origin tier level power was really too terrifying. And the silver lining of all this was that this was only power at the ascending origin tier. If it had been at celestial king tier, then all of them would only have been instantly obliterated. None of them dared to surface. On the contrary, they all tried their best to dive deeper. The deeper they dived, the safer they naturally would be. 1 day, 3 days, 10 days. After a total month, this bout of tsunami waves had finally slowed down. It had slowed down but not stopped. The might of the tsunami waves had already dropped to the severing mundane tier in level, but their coverage had widened instead. Furthermore, there was no rhythm to it at all.
One moment they would be coming from their left, and the next they would come from their right, and at another moment they would come from below them.
In this way, everyone had been separated.
Ling Han surfaced from the sea, and saw that there were merely 7 people around him.
Coincidentally, Qin Wei, who had brought him on board, was also among these 7 people.
Casting his eye further, Ling Han realized that there were also a few people very far away, but this number was much smaller than the initial number that had been on the large ship.
Clearly, the majority had been pushed by the tsunami waves to a very far distance. Ling Han got hold of a piece of broken deck. The boundless sea was very unique. Swimming in it would be extremely straining. Unless there was no other option, no one wanted to waste the effort. The others did the same. Because there were not enough pieces of deck, some people would be sharing a piece between the 2 of them. Gradually, people gathered over, and when true peace had returned, there were only a total of 34 people there. The whereabouts of the others were unknown. They might have died, or they might have gathered to become a second large group.
It was not that there was no ship, but to travel in the boundless seas, a special ship was needed, or they would very easily be sunk by the large waves.
Thus, no one would waste a ship. They simply sprawled themselves out on the deck, going with the flow of the water and waves. To depend on one's effort to swim to the ends of the boundless sea was really just empty words. What everyone could hope for was that another merchant ship would pass by, and take them on board. Ling Han had another hope, and that was Lu Herong. By now, she had to be looking for Hunyo everywhere, and finding him naturally meant finding Hunyo as well. After a few days, a strong wind began to blow on the seas. It was indescribably strong, causing everyone to ride on the waves, their speed even faster than they had been when they were on the ship. 7 days later, a dark shadow appeared ahead of them. "It can't be a Sea King class, right?" someone asked shakily. "That would be too terrifying. If they encountered a Celestial King tier beast, destroying them would only be a piece of cake."
"No, that's an island."
I think I see buildings as well." "That's great. We can recuperate for a while there. Furthermore, the trees that grow in the boundless sea can be used to build a ship. We only have to set up some simple formations for travel, and we can then cross the seas." "That's right. As long as we don't meet with massive winds or waves, that would be enough." Everyone became excited, and rowed strongly with their hands, heading towards the island. Chapter 2012. Ascent Route Island. Easier said than done. The island did not seem particularly distant, but in truth, it was overwhelmingly far away. After they had swum for around an hour, the island was still within sight, but it had become bigger and bigger than the initial tiny black it had once been. Firstly, this sea limited everyone's speed, and secondly, the island was indeed very far from them. But as the island became nearer and nearer, even those with lower cultivation levels could clearly see the structures on the island. "This island is not marked on the map," Qin Wei declared decisively. Those forces that did business on the seas would all draw maps. If they had encountered a natural disaster that could not be avoided just like now, they would swim towards the nearest island, and wait to be rescued or save themselves. And this had indeed saved their lives a considerable number of times. To these forces, the more detailed and more accurate the map was, the higher the chances of their survival in crucial times naturally were. Though they had met with a natural disaster this time, and experienced massive loss, if they could further complete the map of the Qin clan, they could still redeem a little of their losses. The coordinates of an unknown island could be sold off. Of course, this island would only be considered as a rescue station or a stopover.
"I have heard that the cultivators on the seas are all very ferocious, and some say that they are in the habit of feeding on human flesh." Someone suddenly spoke up in a shaking voice.
"Tui, where do these rumors come from?" Immediately, someone else expressed their contempt for such lies. "These are not completely baseless rumors. The living creatures in the sea have not become intelligent, so why would cultivators on the island have evolved?" Another refuted. "Don't think of causing disturbance to the military morale." Qin Wei humphed. He was the only immortal palace tier in their group of 34 people, and naturally held absolute commanding power. The moment his words fell, no one else dared speak another word. "The cultivators on the seas are also people who have migrated from our mainland. Their reasons vary.
The majority have been forced away by their enemies, but there is also a small minority that has come out in search of treasure. Treasure! Hearing this word, a considerable number immediately pricked up their ears. They were instantly energetic, as if they had all forgotten that they were currently bathing in the waters of the boundless seas, and even returning to land was a problem. According to legends, there are rare treasures buried in the boundless seas. Qin Wei only said these words, but he did not go into too much detail. A great many people felt an itch in their hearts, but who would dare compel an immortal palace tier great elite? Let's continue swimming.
Everyone returned back to reality. Their main priority was still returning to land.
If they were really trapped for endless years on a remote island, then all of them could go nuts. After another several hours, they had finally truly come close to the island. This was a very large island, its coastline as long as several hundred miles. However, in the boundless seas, this was actually a small island. Some islands could even be as large as a heaven. An island that was less than the size of a star actually could not be called an island, and could only be considered a slightly larger reef. No wonder this island has never been discovered in millions and millions of years, even if it is only over a dozen days away from the usual sea routes.
As it turns out, it is too small. Qin Wei nodded.
However, what was valuable about islands was that they could provide shelter, especially when large tsunami waves were wreaking havoc. Ships would only have the risk of capsizing, but islands would not need to worry about this problem, because they had already existed here for endless years.
If they had been going to be sunk, they would have sunk a long time ago.
Amidst the water moving, they were already pushed onto the coast, all of them completely exhausted. When they had tried their hardest to power the formation, they had already expended their origin power fully, and they had not had any time to recover after that. Instead, they had to resist the waves still, and swim all this way. It should be known that the waves here in the boundless sea were not the slightest bit gentle, being capable of becoming a great problem even for dividing soul tiers. Thus, the moment they landed, the majority of them were sprawled out in exhaustion, and felt a joy that came from getting a new lease on life.
Now that they had landed on the coast, they really were safe.
Qin Wei was an immortal palace tier, so he naturally was much better than the rest. His figure rose up, and he surveyed this island from a higher spot. It was only several hundred miles in diameter, and for an immortal palace tier elite, seeing it completely was only the matter of an instant.
Hi's figure soon descended back down.
With a frown, he announced, "The islanders
are here."
Those that were still lying on the ground and panting felt their hearts jolt.
What kind of attitude did these islanders have?
If they were weak, then it was fine. No matter what ideas they had, there was no need for them to give any regard. However, what if the other side's strength was close to theirs, or even enough to overwhelm them? Then they would have to pray that the other party bore no malice towards them. The island was very small. Thus, in just a short while, 3 people arrived by walking on air. These 3 people were all youths, 2 men and a woman. The 2 men were extremely handsome, each having their own unique traits. One was rough and manly, while the other was delicate. Meanwhile, the woman was extremely lovely and incredibly alluring. "Why have you come to our ascent route island, everyone?" the man with delicate features asked.
"We encountered tsunami waves, and have drifted here. Please provide us shelter for a few days.
When we cut down some trees and build a ship, we will then leave," Qin Wei said without taking the other lightly. Ling Han's eyes swept over them, and a hint of surprise was revealed in his eyes. He had a feeling that these 3 young people were very strong. They might be no match for him, but they should have Earth Soul level battle prowess, or even be slightly stronger than that. But the problem was that he really had no way to estimate the cultivation levels of these 3 youths.
Not one of them.
To estimate the cultivation level of another, ordinarily one would have to be superior by a major tier, so it was very normal that Ling Han could not tell. But the anomaly lay in how he could not even sense if the other was severing mundane tier or dividing soul tier. This was like, the 3 of them had never cultivated before. Right, that was the feeling. But this was completely impossible, because his instincts told him that these 3 people were not weak. Strange, too strange.
"Oh, I see." The delicate-featured man nodded.
"I can now welcome everyone's arrival on behalf of my master. Please, come and take some rest at our humble abode, and wash away the dirt of your travels.
We can speak later about the matter of your leaving.
Many thanks.
Qin Wei nodded. I am Xiao Jun, the man with delicate features introduced himself. This is my junior brother, Luo He. And this is my junior sister, as well as the only daughter of my master, Lan Ruaji. Qin Wei also introduced himself, and vaguely related their experience of meeting with the tsunami waves, causing Xiao Jun and his party to be emotionally stirred. They expressed that this kind of tsunami waves were very rare, and they had not seen many such waves even in their lives of several million years. This caused a considerable number to be stunned. The three of them were clearly very strong, but they had actually just cultivated for a few million years. Inconceivable. Really too inconceivable. May I ask what your cultivation levels are? Ling Han could not help but ask. This question was continuously winding around in his heart, and he had to speak his mind.
Ling Han, how could you be so abrupt?
Immediately, someone reprimanded him. The locals were willing to take them in, and were planning to be hospitable to them, and he actually asked them such a private matter. If they were angered and cast their whole group out, what were they to do?
If they were weak, then it would be fine, but from the looks of things now, they were not the slightest bit weak.
That's right. How could you ask this kind of question at the first meeting? Someone agreed.
This is just a person that had fallen into dire straits, and we had taken him on board.
He actually does not have much of a relation with us. Another person began to draw a clear dividing line between them and Ling Han. Chapter 2013. Invitation to Battle from the Natives. Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head internally. When they had encountered disaster on the seas, everyone could still share their joys and sorrows together, but now that they were saved and had escaped, each of them showed their selfish nature. Forget it. Since you all have no wish to continue sharing the same boat, I, too, will no longer care for your life or death. Ling Han waved a hand dismissively and smilingly said, Since you people do not want to stick together anymore, this is where we part then. Ling Han, you really are an ungrateful guy, someone rebuked.
Lord Qin kindly allowed you to board, yet you do not have the slightest feeling of gratitude.
You really are a beast. That's right. This is too inhumane. I am ashamed to be in the same party as you. Everyone rebuked him, and even Qin Wei showed an expression of disgust. Ling Han was shocked. He had indeed been taken in by Qin Wei, and this was a fact. But at the time, they had an agreement.
He had not boarded the ship as a guest, but would rather help in powering the formation and provide power for the large ship.
This was a fair transaction. Moreover, when the tsunami had taken place, had he not done his best? It could be said that without his all-out efforts, the large ship possibly couldn't have even held out until the final tsunami wave, and would have long since shattered. Then, just how many people would have been able to stand here and criticize him now would be a question that was left unanswered. On the other hand, Ling Han possessed the Black Tower, so there was no need for him to worry at all about life-threatening danger. Talking about ingratitude, these people were the truly ungrateful ones. Ling Han did not speak further. Since they had endured calamity together, he did not bother to lower himself to the level of these people, but had also drawn a clear dividing line between himself and these people. From now onwards, they were no longer the slightest bit related to him. It's all right. It's all right. Instead, it was Xiao Jun that smiled and played mediator. My master obtained a treasure that had been left behind by an ancient great elite, and cultivated a unique cultivation technique, and traveled another path. That is why everyone cannot distinguish our cultivation levels. Ancient great elite, unique cultivation technique. Everyone immediately became excited by these few words, and couldn't help but recall what Qin Wei had said. There were treasures hidden in the boundless seas.
It looked like the master of these three people had obtained a rare treasure.
Anything that involved the ancient era meant that it was powerful. The three of us are the equivalent of Yang Soul, Luo he continued. Oh! Everyone nodded. Yet Ling Han's heart shuddered. Yang Soul Tier. But going by his instincts, these three possessed the battle prowess of Earth Soul at least, and he trusted his instincts very much. Then there was only one possibility left. These three people were all monarch tiers. 3 monarch tiers had appeared at the same time on a tiny island. Was this even possible?
Ling Han thought that the chances of this were very small, but how could the abnormal strength of these three people be explained otherwise?
Strange.
Come this way. Xiao Jun and the others deliberately slowed their steps so that everyone could easily survey the scenery as they passed. The trees here were very tall, but they were all a myriad of colors and very beautiful. After walking for about an hour, they finally arrived in front of the structure that they had previously glimpsed. This was an ancient castle, and should have existed for many, many years. The walls of the ancient castle were covered with moss, exuding the aura of age that came with time.
Please.
That was because Xiao Jun had previously said that their master had obtained an ancient cultivation technique, taking a different path. In that case, it was very normal that they could not distinguish their cultivation levels. Ling Han, meanwhile, was even more curious. That was because he saw the two stone statues that were placed on either side of the doors when he entered through the great doors of the ancient castle. Those were two human figures, but wings sprouted from their backs, while their feet were like the hooves of oxen, and there was a long tail that trailed behind them as well, with horns growing from their foreheads.
This kind of creature.
Ling Han had never seen such before.
Was it
really as simple as having cultivated an ancient cultivation technique? The people inside the ancient castle were all very cordial. When they saw Ling Han and his group enter, they all rushed over and greeted them. Some took out food and wine, inviting them to be guests at their homes.
Haha, guests should suit the convenience of the host, and just relax, Xiao Jun said. Master is presently in seclusion.
He may occasionally come out of seclusion, and then I will inform him. Perhaps Master would be very willing to receive all these guests.
Everyone nodded.
It was already very kind that the islanders were willing to provide them with temporary shelter. Whether the main host was willing to grant them an audience naturally depended on his mood. They did not dare be impudent, either. There were a few people in the ancient palace that had frightening auras. Even if their cultivation level was not clear, they could feel that they were extremely strong, and should be comparable to immortal palace tier.
Everyone had finally settled down.
However, Xiao Jun had said that everything on the island belonged to the island master, who was also their master. Without obtaining the agreement of the island master, they could not take a single blade of grass or a twig from the island. Thus, everyone could not cut down trees to build a ship now, and could only silently wait for the island master to speak. However, a few days later, Xiao Jun once again appeared. It was still the three youths together, and they invited all the outsiders over as guests. With an invitation from the host, what more when they had something to ask of the other, they naturally could not refuse. Everyone arrived at the training ground of the ancient castle at the time agreed upon. Xiao Jun and his group were not the only people here. There were also a great many residents of the ancient castle here, but everyone was separated on two clearly different sides. Honestly, the training ground was not big, and there were only about 100 spectators' seats. However, the sparring area of the training ground used regulations of space. It looked small, but was actually huge, so there was no need to worry that the fighters could not go into full swing due to limits of space. Everyone sat down, and maids served fragrant tea to them, so their reception was quite thoughtful.
Brother Xiao, has the island master spoken? Qin Wei couldn't help but ask.
He had the highest cultivation level out of their party of survivors, and was also a member of the Qin clan, so he had full reason to lead everyone back onto the mainland. Thus, what he was most concerned about was also the matter of their return. Xiao Jun shook his head and said, Lord Qin, don't be anxious. My master is presently comprehending a technique, and without his approval, none of us would dare disturb him without permission, so please stay here for some time longer. Qin Wei could only shut his mouth at this, and suppress the anxiety in his heart. Brother Xiao, why have you invited us here today? Someone who was rasher immediately asked. Luo he smiled and said, all of us are cultivators, and we have stayed overseas for a long time, being overly subjective and disregarding the outside world. Thus, we would like to have a spar with all of you so we can also be made aware of our own inadequacies. Hearing these words, everyone showed an expression of pride. That was natural. You people had only obtained an ancient technique, but how could a single ancient technique be enough? The strength of cultivators would also be affected by celestial techniques, as well as battle experience, his own natural talent, and other such factors.
Chapter 2014. Completely one-sided. Everyone had not even prepared themselves for it, and the battle had already ended. So fast. No, how could a battle of equal cultivation levels end so quickly? The opposing side had to have concealed his cultivation level, and used his superior cultivation level of dividing soul tier to suppress his opponent. But when they thought back carefully, they discovered that this theory was off too. Though they cultivated different cultivation techniques, the cultivation level would be clear the moment an attack was launched. Even though Feng Dang's actual cultivation level was still quite vague, it was definitely not the dividing soul tier, and they could confirm that fact. It was possible that he was a king tier, and was invincible among his peers. Everyone suppressed the shock in their hearts. After all, they were only a group of sailors and merchants, so how could there be king tiers among them? What king tier would come out to be a sailor or a merchant? I am Lu Yi, and my cultivation level is also the equivalent of 4th severance. Please. Another young man from the side of the ancient castle leaped out. Let me. Pang. One person from Qin Wei's party had just leaped out when he was sent flying with a single punch. He was completely no match for his opponent. This time, everyone on Qin Wei's side was moved. Could king tiers appear one after another like this? Looking closely at Feng Dang and Lu Yi, the aptitude of these two people really could not be considered all that impressive. What king tier did not have an amazing skeletal structure? In that case, they were not king tiers, nor did they have an advantage in cultivation level, so why did they possess stronger battle prowess? There was only one answer. The cultivation technique they cultivated was too powerful. Was that really the case? I am at Yang Soul tier, and I would like to seek guidance. Someone from Qin Wei's side leaped out, issuing a challenge to the ancient castle side. I am Mo Han. A young man walked out, strikingly handsome, and having a kind of might that could ensnare others. My cultivation level is equivalent to 5th severance. 5th severance. When these words were spoken, a great many people on Qin Wei's side looked puzzled and blank. 5th severance. What was the 5th severance? Wasn't the 4th severance the end of the line for the severing mundane tier? So where did this 5th severance come from? However, there were also some people that looked disbelieving, so stunned that their heads were about to explode. That was a monarch tier. Ling Han's eyes also lit up, the confusion in his eyes becoming more pronounced. Taking Xiao Jun and his group into account, that would be 4 monarch tiers. How did monarch tiers appear in the Eastern Celestial Realm? Accumulation through numbers. Using a population of 100 million as the basis, only a single monarch tier would be born, and merely having the aptitude of a monarch tier was not enough. Without a celestial king tier level background, which provided benefits such as the natural peach seal, how would he survive the heavenly tribulation of 5th severance? Could it be that there was a celestial king on this island? The population here was clearly pitifully few, yet 4 monarch tiers had actually appeared amongst them. This was not logical. Furthermore, just what the heck was the cultivation technique they cultivated? Ling Han thought back carefully, and suddenly a sense of familiarity rose up in him. He felt that he seemed to have seen the way these people fought somewhere else before, but no matter how much he tried to remember, it did not seem to match anything in his memories either. Pang! On the other side, Mo Han had also begun fighting with the person from Qin Wei's side, and similarly had solved the issue with a single move. This was very normal. In terms of cultivation level, 5th severance was equivalent to Yang Soul, and those that could advance to this cultivation level were all monarch tiers, and could be invincible even with a gap of 2 levels. Then wasn't it very normal that they could win instantly with a single move? The spars continued. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, the ancient castle side had an absolute advantage, and even if they were weaker by 1 or even 2 minor levels, the ancient castle side could still manage to win. This gap in power was really astonishingly wide. Those on Qin Wei's side all lowered their heads, their faces flushed red. Just now, they had thought themselves infallible, and thought that the people in the ancient castle were all overly subjective and disregarded the outside world, so their strength definitely would be very poor. But once they fought, they found out that every member of the opposing side was a fierce fighter, which naturally caused them much embarrassment. I really had not expected that everyone's strength would be so. Hee hee, Xiao Jun said smilingly, wanting to say something, but hesitated at the end. However, everyone clearly understood the meaning that he wanted to express. And that was, "You are all too weak. And you said that you would show us your skills? Yet each one of you are weaklings, not one capable of being a qualified match." These words caused their heads to dip even lower. A hint of mockery flashed through Xiao Jun's eyes, and he continued, "Master has no intention of hiding secrets, so I am willing to share the cultivation technique that we cultivate with all of you." "What?" Hearing these words, everyone raised their heads, their faces filled with disbelief. Techniques would not be taught easily, and this was the ancient rule. To say nothing of an outsider, even with their own people such as father and son, that core secret technique could not be taught easily. Continuing with the example, a father would have to be sure that this son was worthy of being nurtured. For example, in a great clan, only a limited number of core clansmen would be able to cultivate the highest grade of cultivation technique, while the others would cultivate something that was slightly inferior. In any sect or clan that was the case. Only the minority or even a single person could cultivate the highest level of cultivation technique. But now, Xiao Jun actually said that he would take out the cultivation technique that they cultivated and share it with all of them. Everyone exchanged looks, and thought that they had heard wrongly. Was there really anyone that kind in this world? Actually, our cultivation technique is very simple. What is most important is to lend power, Xiao Jun said without concern. We believe in a deity of this heaven and earth, and only need to sincerely ask for his help during battle, and he would be able to bestow endless might on us. Are there any volunteers? We can try it out on the spot, and I guarantee that your battle prowess will immediately increase several-fold, or even tenfold. This filled many people with disbelief. Merely with them believing in a deity, their battle prowess would directly soar to as much as tenfold. I will. One of them jumped out. Believing was fine. If it was useless, then he could just give up the faith. Xiao Jun pulled that person over with a smile, and whispered into his ears for a while. It was really just a short while, and that person skeptically walked to the training grounds, and said, "Little Hai, come and spar with me. The two of us are close in strength, and we have frequently sparred. Whether my strength has increased or otherwise, it would become clearest after a spar with you." All right. A person from Qin Wei's party jumped out. The two of them began to fight, exchanging blows, and it was completely indiscernible which of them was stronger. It was useless. "Believe in the deity," Xiao Jun spoke up, his voice slow and unhurried. That person from before suddenly became serious, his mouth muttering words. It was not known what he was saying. All of a sudden, he became stronger, and began to beat down on his opponent. Then, he became stronger and stronger, his battle prowess having increased 4 to 5 times. Fuck, it really was doable. Everyone was stunned to the point of speechlessness. This was practically even better than ingesting celestial pills. You only had to believe in a deity, and your battle prowess would increase a good few times. One could not believe this, but would also incredibly long for this. "Young Master Xiao, can I cultivate this cultivation technique?" "That's right. Can I too?" A considerable number immediately called out, their faces incredibly excited. No wonder there were so many king tiers and emperor tiers here. In fact, there were even a good number of monarch tiers here. So that was why. Xiao Jun showed a smile and said, "Master has never cherished his own skill to coerce others. With the intention of benefiting the whole world, he is willing to share the unique cultivation technique with everyone." Hold on. A soft exclamation rang out, and Ling Han stood up. He leaped into the arena. "My fists are itching as well, and I would like to spar." Just now, he had finally recalled why he would think that there was something familiar about the movements of those in the ancient castle. He remembered when he had been in the ancient realm, he had once entered into a mystery realm. There was a mysterious river flowing there, and there were a considerable number of tribes along the banks of the river. These people were all cultivators, yet belonged to a completely different system of cultivation. They did not cultivate regulations, or rather they did not cultivate the regulations of this heaven and earth. Their power originated from that mysterious river. Ling Han had once traced the river to its source, but he could not venture there. Only Xiao Gu went, and a massive battle had broken out. In the end, Xiao Gu had returned with injuries. This was exactly the same. Chapter 2015. Danger. Previously, Ling Han had not managed to recall it, because those people from the ancient realm were too weak, and there was no possible comparison between the two. It was only now that he felt some kind of strange change taking place in those two statues by the doors, transmitting an amazing power to the person inside the arena, and only then did realization dawn on him. Clearly, everyone in the ancient castle was more covert when they borrowed power, or rather more proficient, and Ling Han was unable to sense it right until that newbie made an attempt just now, which finally allowed Ling Han to capture some traces of it. This was a completely new system of cultivation, but was also a system of cultivation that Xiao Gu despised to the extreme. Ling Han did not know the people here, but he knew Xiao Gu, so he was naturally on Xiao Gu's side. Furthermore, the methods of Xiao Jun and his party practically could not be more evident. It was a pretense that they were asking them for a spar, while the truth was that they were showing off their own strength, and thus tempting all of them to cultivate that so-called technique with them. There were indeed kind people in this world. This was a fact that Ling Han admitted, but was there anyone so kind that would take out his own cultivation technique to share with others? And furthermore, a group of complete strangers whose origins they had completely no idea about at that. This Ling Han did not believe. No matter what, he did not believe it. If something was too unusual, there had to be something off about it, and added with Xiao Gu's dislike, he naturally was going to stir up trouble. Aren't you guys showing off your superior strength? Then, I will be the one to beat down on you people, and let's see who's stronger then.
This brother does not believe in our strength?
Xiao Jun asked calmly. You should be in the dividing soul tier, right?
Young Master Xiao, this person has no relation to us.
That's right, we have drawn a clear dividing line between him and us a few days ago. Please don't allow him to be a reason for ruining our amicable relations. Those from Qin Wei's side all clamored, fearing that Xiao Jun would suddenly change his mind, and say that he would not teach them the secret technique that could allow them to become powerful in an instant. Meanwhile, Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, I am presently at the late stage of Yang Soul. In terms of cultivation level, you are a match for my junior brother. Xiao Jun turned his head and looked at Luo He. Junior brother, you go and spar with this brother. All right. Luo He stepped out, and leaped into the arena. Ling Han raised his clasped hands.
In polite courtesies, he made no mistake, and made no mention at all of the fact that he had once seen this kind of cultivation system before.
I am Ling Han. Brother Ling, please.
Luo He raised his clasped hands, seeming very humble, but there was a hint of contempt in his gaze.
Ling Han strode out, and did not use any kind of movement technique. He merely strode out rapidly, quickly approaching Luo He. Luo He scoffed internally. His opponent was going to be serious right from the very first move, and make it a close-quarters battle? He was filled with utter and complete disdain for these people of the celestial realm.
All the expressions on his face were merely an act.
See if I won't beat you up with just a single punch. He raised his fist.
Boom, with a wave. There was no light of regulations, or a single flicker of any great Tao seals, yet the attack carried an incredibly terrifying suppressive might.
This was a completely different system of cultivation. Ling Han smiled faintly. Who cares what system of cultivation you cultivate? In the end, it's all down to battle prowess. He clenched his right hand into a fist, and then launched a punch.
He coughed continuously, his face astonishingly pale.
Hiss, complete silence fell.
Everyone was looking at Ling Han with a stunned expression.
The people of the ancient castle were stunned because they were sure that they were invincible in a battle of equal cultivation levels. Even if they were a minor level weaker, they could still turn the situation around. But now,
in a battle of equal cultivation levels, Luo He could not even withstand a single blow from Ling Han.
This was something they could not accept. And those people on Qin Wei's side were even more shocked. They had spent a longer time with Ling Han, but all of them had thought he was just an ordinary Yang Soul tier. Now that they had suddenly witnessed his true might, this was practically inconceivable to them. A considerable number of people wanted to stomp and pound their chests in frustration. Previously, they had actually drawn a clear dividing line between themselves and Ling Han. It should be known that this man was a monarch tier. What was a monarch tier?
Only a prodigy that was destined to become a celestial king could be called a monarch tier. They were overwhelmed with regret. Previously, they had endured a calamity together, and this was the best chance for them to nurture a friendship, yet it was they themselves that had spoilt this completely. Pigs, they really were as extraordinarily stupid as pigs. Brother Ling is indeed very strong. Xiao Jun showed a hint of seriousness, withdrawing the contempt that had existed all this while in his eyes. Being able to defeat Luo He with a single blow, this was powerful strength.
Let me try. He stepped out. He was a minor level higher than Luo He, and could also defeat Luo He with a single strike. Otherwise, he definitely would not be asking for his own humiliation.
Come then, Ling Han said calmly. His motive was very simple, and that was to make sure everyone knew that there was no need to believe in that so-called deity. The Tao of the celestial realm was also wide-ranging and profound, and was worth their diligent study. Xiao Jun leaped into the arena, and assumed an offensive stance. Please. Please. The two of them spoke at the same time, and then launched an offensive towards the other. Boom, boom, boom. The moment they clashed, both released powerful moves, holding no reservations at all. To Xiao Jun, he had to re-establish the powerful name and invincible reputation of the deity, so he naturally had to defeat Ling Han as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Ling Han wanted to set things right. Similarly, he wished to defeat his opponent to show that he was right. Destroy this place if you can. Small Tower suddenly piped up. Ling Han paused. He had indeed wanted to ruin Xiao Jun and his group's conspiracy, but had not planned to destroy them. There are rules in the heaven and earth. This kind of completely different system of cultivation can be considered a challenge to or even a betrayal of the heaven and earth. And when there are many people who cultivate this kind of cultivation technique, it could even shake the regulations of heaven and earth, causing this whole space to collapse, Small Tower explained. That's serious? Ling Han frowned. At first, he purely wanted to cause trouble, but if it really involved the survival and continued existence of this space, then everyone had a duty to act. He gave a "E" and asked, "The system of cultivation here should be the same as what we saw at the ancient realm. Why didn't you say this at that time?" Are you an idiot? Small Tower said in disdain. At that time, just how much of my memory had recovered? How could I have possibly known this? Right, no matter what, it was in the right. In any case, it was fine as long as Ling Han knew the proud tower's temper, and there was no need to take it to heart. All right, then he'd just beat this guy up first. Ling Han roared and unleashed his full battle prowess. Instantly, his power increased over tenfold. Just now, he had been distracted, and conversed with Small Tower. This naturally affected his battle prowess, and now once he was making an all-out effort, it was like he was a changed person. Everyone watched with captivated eyes. Those who were weaker in strength could not even catch sight of the two fighters. What more distinguish which of the two of them had the upper hand at present? Chapter 2016. Belief. Those on the ancient castle side all paled in great shock. They were filled with absolute confidence in the cultivation technique they cultivated and the deity that they worshipped, and reality had also proven that their system of cultivation was really superior and noble uncountable times. Did you think that Ling Han and his group were the first people to come to this island? You would be wrong. Who knew how many batches of people had come here? But after they had arrived here, there had never been any who left. But now, an outsider whose cultivation level was inferior to Xiao Jun could actually beat down on Xiao Jun. It should be known that Xiao Jun was the best in terms of natural talent among them. If even Xiao Jun would be defeated, then there would be no one capable of being a match for Ling Han in the same cultivation level. This had overturned the superiority complex that they had maintained for all this while, and also caused a sliver of crack to appear in their confidence, shaking the belief that they had in their deity. Xiao Jun roared furiously, trying his best to turn his disadvantageous position around, but all that was merely wasted effort. Ling Han was simply stronger than he was. Though he was not very much stronger, when one had reached the level they had, how could they afford the slightest gap? When the battle had progressed to close to 1,000 exchanges, Ling Han shot out a kick. Pang! Xiao Jun was sent flying, and crashed solidly into the wall. Brother Ling is indeed strong.
Xiao Jun rubbed the discomfort in his chest and forced out a smile. Ling Han smiled faintly and replied, "Good battle." He did not listen to Small Tower's words and directly killed the man, because this was the latter's territory. There were a good number of Immortal Palace tier-level elites alone, and that island master that had been in seclusion all this while was even likely to be an ascending origin tier. If he killed anyone, that would mean turning completely hostile, without any way out. Hearing Xiao Jun admit defeat personally, those on the ancient castle side all broke into a commotion. The deity that they had believed in all this while practically crumbled in an instant, and they could not accept it. Xiao Jun was unconcerned, however. Instead, the smile on his face became even more pronounced as he said, "Brother Ling's natural talent in cultivation is really astonishing, and if Brother Ling is willing to switch to cultivating the vein of cultivation technique of my master, I can guarantee that Brother Ling's strength will improve to another level." When everyone heard this, they all nodded. Just now, that other person had just believed in some deity, and his battle prowess had improved 4 to 5 times all of a sudden. If the same logic was applied on Ling Han, just how strong would he be by then? And also precisely because of this, the people on the ancient castle side also recovered their confidence quickly. That was right. What conflict did Ling Han being strong have with their deity being strong? As long as Ling Han was willing to switch to believing in their god, Ling Han would be able to become even stronger. Then, didn't that mean that there was not the slightest bit of mistake in their choice? Seeing the increasingly heated gazes all around him, Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head. Looks like all his actions previously had been wasted effort. Firstly, these people were too captivated, and secondly, Xiao Jun's adaptability was extremely impressive. Otherwise, he only had to fly into a humiliated anger, and it would deepen the doubts in everyone's hearts. The situation would definitely not have been like it was now. Interesting. He was a good opponent. A smile appeared at the corners of Ling Han's lips. To those who stayed in this heaven and earth, the people of the ancient castle were akin to vermin that would affect the existence of the heaven and earth. Though it was now a majestic tower, and was definitely not something that a few bugs could damage, if these bugs were not quickly stomped on, who knew how far they would develop? Just like the 30-plus people today being bewitched by Xiao Jun and his group, how many of them would throw themselves into these welcoming arms? This kind of poisonous vermin should be eliminated immediately. "Young Master Xiao, please teach us the celestial technique," someone called out shamelessly. "Please teach the celestial technique." Even more people called out. A slightly proud expression appeared on Xiao Jun's face. A situation that could have possibly been complete chaos had returned to the original course with just a few words from him, and even he could not help but want to cheer for himself. "There is no need to rush. My master has a great wish to teach the technique to the world, and definitely would not keep the treasure to himself," he said with a slight smile, seeming extremely sincere. This touched the outsiders incredibly, and they felt that the island master was really the kindest and most benevolent person in this world, being willing to teach a supreme cultivation technique without any reservations. There was definitely no other person that could be as generous as that. Ling Han smirked internally. At first, he had been curious why Xiao Jun was so determined to teach the cultivation technique of his master, but through Small Tower's explanation, Ling Han now knew that this was an invasion. Once it succeeded, to the entire celestial realm, to the celestial realm, ancient realm and all other small worlds, it would be an absolute calamity. And going by that logic, the explanation of their island master being presently in seclusion, and thus unable to decide whether to allow them to cut trees, was actually a falsehood. Their motive was merely to prevent them from leaving the island. "Those that are willing to cultivate this cultivation technique, please come with me," Xiao Jun announced loudly. Immediately, practically everyone followed behind him. Aside from Ling Han. Ling Han was stunned. Even Qin Wei had fallen for it. Very soon, the people here had all left. Aside from Ling Han, only Lan Ruaji, this delicate and bewitching woman, was still seated in a graceful position. Her arms were stretched out and placed on the chair's backrest, causing her breasts to become even more pronounced. A smile appeared at her lips, while her alluring eyes were filled with challenge. Ling Han was unlike the others, who were easily hooked. This spiked her interest. She wanted to personally pull Ling Han over to their side, and once she succeeded, she would have her 17th consort. That was right. She enjoyed playing with men, and any man that she had her eye on,
no matter how much of a prodigy he was, would not be able to resist her charms. Young Master Ling is really so awesome. Having been here on this island for so many years, this is the first time I have seen eldest senior brother defeated in a battle of equal cultivation level, she said delicately, her voice like asterisk 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 and incredibly melodious. Ling Han smiled faintly and stated, "There are about 1 or 2 dozen people like me in the Eastern Celestial Realm at least, and there would be even more in the Western Celestial Realm." Who cared whether there really was or not? He would just brag first, and find out later. Meanwhile, Lan Ruaji smiled alluringly. "Young Master Ling, just now eldest senior brother asked you if you were willing to join us. A supreme technique will be taught to you, so even while your cultivation level does not change, your battle prowess would increase tenfold at least. Wasn't it said that your father has the wish to spread his technique without any reservations? Why is there a need to join you?" Ling Han asked smilingly. "Spreading the technique is one matter, but the truly amazing part will only be taught to the innermost core portion of people. Isn't that right, young Master Ling?" Lan Ruaji suddenly straightened her upper body. When she said, "Isn't that right?" she tapped her finger lightly on her breast. Underneath the tight-fitting fabric, the outline of her extremely seductive plump breasts was fully displayed. Ling Han ignored it completely. In terms of looks, there was no way she could catch up to the Empress and Hu Niu. In terms of bearing, the Empress left her behind in her dust. In terms of allure, bewitching Maiden Ro was completely out of her reach. Even bewitching Maiden Ro was unable to move him. What more this kind of woman? Thoughts streaked through Ling Han's mind like lightning. If he was to destroy the force on this island all alone, this was completely unrealistic. Then, there were only 2 paths laid out in front of him. First, wait for Lu Herong to arrive, and then destroy this place. Second, he could feign civility with them first, and then take the chance to build a ship and leave. Then, he could come back later to destroy this place. Whichever the case, he could not immediately turn hostile with them at present. Thus, Ling Han thought for a moment and said, "On the contrary, I am slightly interested now." Chapter 2017. Lan Tianyu. A proud smile appeared on Lan Ruaji's face. She was confident that her charm was unmatchable. How could Ling Han possibly be capable of resisting? This really was her being arrogant and narrow-minded. Just how many people were there in total on this tiny island? She was indeed pretty and alluring, and naturally had become an unrivaled bloom. However, if she was in the Eastern and Western Celestial Realms, though she could still be considered a beauty, she still was some way away from the extent of an exquisite beauty. It could not be helped that she had never seen truly beautiful women, and naturally thought herself to be overwhelmingly beautiful. "Come, young Master Ling, I will show you around," she invited. She should feel lucky that Hu Niu had not appeared now. Otherwise, the latter would definitely have sent a slap straight at her. Ling Han nodded. This was just good, as he indeed wanted to get to know this island better. The 2 of them first walked around inside the ancient castle. Previously, their range of movement had been restricted, but now with the daughter of the island master leading the way, he naturally could go anywhere freely. Where does this place lead to?" Ling Han asked, pointing at a pair of stone doors. Previously Lan Ruaji would directly push the doors open whenever they met with doors blocking the way, but now she completely ignored these stone doors. Ling Han examined these great doors closely. There were actually formation patterns inscribed on them. Clearly, there was a formation laid out here. If one could not unravel the formation at the first instant, the formation would either attack the invader harshly, or proceed to raise an alarm. Lan Ruaji smiled delicately and said, "This, you would only have the right to find out after you truly become one of us." "So mysterious?" Ling Han pretended to be very curious. Hee. Yet Lan Ruaji's lips were sealed very tightly, and she did not leak out the slightest bit of information. Instead, she dragged Ling Han away with her. Afterwards, when Ling Han repeatedly drew the conversation back to this topic, Lan Ruaji kept using the same excuse to evade the topic. Only one who had become a member of the ancient castle would have the right to know further secrets. The 2 of them walked on, and soon had completed their rounds of the entire ancient castle. Ling Han suddenly frowned. He had sensed an unusual aura. "What is it?" Yet Lan Ruaji did not sense anything at all. Ha 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 ha, as expected of a prodigy among prodigies, to have discovered my presence so quickly. A long bout of laughter was heard, and a man with lanky build walked out from behind a massive stone pillar. Fourth uncle.
When Lan Ruaji saw him, she hurriedly greeted him politely. Ling Han also surveyed this man.
He looked very young, his black locks hanging haphazardly over his shoulders, and his features were also very handsome. Most importantly, this man was very strong, giving Ling Han a feeling of unfathomable depths.
I heard that someone defeated Xiao Jun, so I came to take a look for myself, this young man said. In any case, age could not be distinguished from the appearance in the celestial realm.
It was possible that a gray-haired old geezer would have to address a young brat as great-grandfather.
This is Ling Han, Lan Ruaji introduced. This is my fourth uncle, Lan Tianyu.
Ling Han raised his clasped hands slightly and said, Lord Lan.
Lan Tianyu flicked out a finger. Wang, he summoned a circular ring, which encircled all three of them. In Ling Han's eyes, the world had enlarged indefinitely.
He had immediately appeared in an expansive and boundless grassy plain, and from the outside, it was clearly Ling Han and the others that were rapidly shrinking down, becoming who knew how many times smaller than even a tiny rice grain. This was a spatial god tool, but it was not the type to directly draw others in.
Instead, it affected the surrounding environment. Ling Han could directly fly off and leave. He only had to exit this area, and he naturally would be able to return to his original state. He was slightly displeased.
Though he did not fear challenge, the action of directly pulling him into a battle zone without his agreement caused a strong feeling of dislike to rise up in him.
This kind of person was asking to be beaten. Come, show me. Lan Tianyu pounced, charging out towards Ling Han.
He naturally cultivated the other kind of cultivation system. As he sent out a palm strike, there was no ripple of Great Tao, nor was there any light of regulations of the Great Tao. There was only a shadow enshrouding his palm, exuding an unmatchable evil, yet also astonishingly powerful.
Ling Han's hands balled into fists, and he greeted the incoming attack.
Pang pang pang. The two of them were embroiled in an intense battle.
In a short instant, they had exchanged over a dozen blows. Lan Ruaji watched with starry eyes. Although she, too, had monarch tier-level strength, she still felt like she was unable to watch the battle clearly. These two people were too powerful. She was naturally clear and familiar with how strong Lan Tianyu could be, but what stunned her was Ling Han, as he was actually capable of exchanging blows with Lan Tianyu. It should be known that Lan Tianyu was even stronger than Xiao Jun. She knew that Ling Han had defeated Xiao Jun, but definitely did not think that Ling Han would have strength to match Lan Tianyu. But now? Facts spoke louder than words, causing her to watch with wide eyes, and making her passion burn ever brighter. She liked powerful men as they would bring her a feeling of accomplishment that was incredibly amazing. Unfortunately, though there was no lack of handsome men among the young and middle-aged men that had drifted onto their island, none of them was as strong as her in a battle of equal cultivation levels. And now Ling Han had popped out, causing her to ignite all of a sudden. Boom, boom, boom. Ling Han and Lan Tianyu were still exchanging blows. They would be fighting rapidly at times, exchanging several dozen blows in a mere instant, but sometimes they would also be fighting extremely slowly, only launching an attack after being in a stalemate for 3 to 4 breaths. But in reality, the slower the attacks came, the higher the danger level was. Both sides were releasing powerful moves, and their destructive ability would be higher. Of course, this danger was actually referring to Lan Tianyu. With Ling Han's physique being as strong as it was, there was basically no one in the dividing soul tier capable of killing him. If it was not for the fact that he was unwilling to reveal this trump card, he would be completely capable of using his own injuries to trade for injuries with his opponent. And then Lan Tianyu would tragically discover that he would be covered with injuries, close to death, but Ling Han would be completely fine. Lan Tianyu was indeed stronger than Xiao Jun, and it was not just by a little bit, either, putting an extremely great pressure on Ling Han. Going by Ling Han's estimation, this man's true battle prowess should be equivalent to peak stage Earth Souls level, and then after extracting the so-called deity's power, his battle prowess would soar into early stage Heaven Souls level, or even the extent of middle stage. This was enough to match Ling Han. In fact, this was slightly superior to Ling Han. Thus,
This was the real reason why there were so many monarch tiers and emperor tiers on the island.
That was not their true battle prowess.
Fourth uncle, is it fine now?
Lan Ruaji called out from the side. All right. Lan Tianyu stopped, a prideful expression appearing on his face. Though victory was still undecided, he had enough confidence that he would have had the upper hand in just a few more moves. And he was sure that Ling Han, too, knew this fact. Since he already got the upper hand, he naturally would be satisfied with ceasing the battle.
After all, the reason for his exchanging blows with Ling Han was not for killing this young man, but so that the latter would know that there was still someone capable of suppressing him here.
Ling Han also smiled faintly. In terms of battle prowess, it was indeed Lan Tianyu that was just that slight bit stronger. That was because Ling Han's own cultivation level was too low, and in terms of genuine battle prowess, he would be able to kill the other man single-handedly. Depending on external power, even if the other party won, what would be the point? You can indeed borrow power now, but would you be able to keep borrowing it? Is it guaranteed that you could do it in every corner of the celestial realm? Can you guarantee that you can still do the same in Celestial King tier? That Ling Han was not going to believe. This borrowed power did not come from the heaven and earth, but from some powerful existence, such as a ninth heaven celestial king. But a ninth heaven celestial king was not omnipotent. For example, if a ninth heaven celestial king wanted to borrow power, how was he going to borrow it? Compared to this kind of thing, Ling Han was more trusting of his own strength. Chapter 2018. Beast Tide. Lan Tianyu had achieved his purpose in this battle. With loud laughter he strode off. Young Master Ling, don't take it to heart. Firstly, fourth uncle's cultivation level is above yours, and secondly, you have not been blessed by the deity yet. Otherwise you too would be able to borrow power from the deity, and you would definitely not be weaker to fourth uncle then, Lan Ruaji comforted. Ling Han naturally wouldn't take it to heart. If it was a life or death battle, he could guarantee that the person that would die would definitely be Lan Tianyu. However, there was no need to say these words. Firstly, Lan Ruaji would think that he was a sore loser, and secondly, he had no wish to reveal his trump card anyway. Young Master Ling, let us go and prepare the ceremony to offer sacrifices. Who knows, my father may also appreciate your natural talent, and perhaps will wish to take you as a disciple, Lan Ruaji said, seemingly thinking that Ling Han could no longer escape from her gentle trap. Ling Han's heart moved, and he asked, what cultivation level is the Lord Island Master at? Lan Ruaji hesitated slightly, but still answered, Father is equivalent to an Ascending Origin Tier elite. Ascending Origin Tier. Ling Han nodded internally. The strength of this island was extraordinary. If this was in the Eastern Celestial Realm, this would be a genuine 4-star force, which was considerably powerful. Led by Lan Ruaji, Ling Han arrived in a room inside the ancient castle. Those like Qin Wei and his group were all here. Everyone was waiting. They had to first bathe and burn joss sticks, and only after a whole 3 days would they be able to officially enter under the banner of that deity. Ling Han got familiar with the sequence of events. In this process, he would have to offer a sliver of his spirit respectfully to that deity. It was just a little bit, and would definitely not have any effect on him personally. But this was something that Ling Han definitely couldn't accept. Firstly, to cultivate to the highest cultivation level, the spirit had to maintain the state of an absolute whole. Secondly, there were a great many evil techniques in this world that depended on the use of blood and spirit to cast. To split out a portion of his spirit to be given to another was equivalent to placing his own life in the hands of another. How could that be condoned? As expected, the so-called teaching the technique to all and the so-called deity were all false. How could there be any free lunch in this world? But looking at Qin Wei and the rest, they all looked completely unconcerned. Their yearning for further improvement of their strength had already surpassed all else. For them, to say nothing of Celestial King tier in this life, they might not be able to reach even Ascending Origin tier and Immortal Palace tier. Then why should they be concerned about how complete their spirit was? As for having their lives being under the control of another, that was something that they had not thought of at all. At present, their minds were filled with thoughts of having a chance to improve their strength without expending any effort. Everyone, are you all really going to believe that there would be such a good thing in this world? Taking advantage of the fact that they were the only ones sitting quietly here, Ling Han spoke up. He had no intention to save these people, and merely wanted to cause trouble for the ancient castle's side. Ling Han, what do you mean? Someone immediately jumped up. Could it be that you wish to enjoy the blessing of the deity alone? Ling Han was stunned. His intentions had actually been misinterpreted thus. You are already a monarch tier, and can be considered invincible in your cultivation level. Even if we were blessed by the deity, we cannot possibly become stronger than you. So why do you have to envy us? That's right. Without need, they naturally could hold their heads high in front of Ling Han. This seemed to have ignited the passion of the masses. They began to spout out words of crusading against Ling Han all at once, as if Ling Han had done some heinous deed. Every half an hour, someone would come in to add another joss stick, and when the time came for the next edition, someone quietly pulled the person who was adding the joss stick aside, and said something quietly to him. The person left, and Xiao Jun appeared only after a while, beckoning towards Ling Han as he said, "Brother Ling, please come with me for a word." Ling Han was sure that he had been told on. He was curious to see what the other would do. He stood up, and walked outside by Xiao Jun's side. "Brother Ling, do you still have some doubts regarding the deity that we believe in?" Xiao Jun asked calmly. "Of course not." Ling Han pushed the blame off himself cleanly. "But someone has told me that Brother Ling's resolution does not seem to be very firm," Xiao Jun said smilingly. "Would Brother Xiao believe me, or choose to believe a piece of trash?" Ling Han countered with his own question. Xiao Jun couldn't help but pause quietly. After a while he suddenly laughed loudly, and said, "I naturally believe Brother Ling." Ling Han only smiled slightly. Who cared if Xiao Jun believed or not? In any case, when the time came, Ling Han would definitely cause great trouble, and then duck into the Black Tower to take refuge. An ascending origin tier elite would not be able to do anything to the Black Tower, and what he had to take care about was only to avoid being killed before he successfully hid in the Black Tower. Boom! Just at this moment, the whole island shook with a tremor, as if an earthquake had taken place. Xiao Jun was at a loss at first, which was quickly followed by a shocked expression. "Oh no, the beast tide has come in assault." Woo! Just at this moment, the strange sound of a horn rang out. Immediately, the whole ancient castle was alerted. "All of you come out, the beast tide is here." Xiao Jun shot quickly into the meditation chamber, calling out to the masses. "What beast tide? Are there any beast tides on the boundless seas? I never heard about this." Everyone exchanged looks, all appearing to be very confused and completely blank. "Speak less rubbish and come out quickly." Yet Xiao Jun called out harshly. This kind of attitude involuntarily caused a considerable number of people to feel displeased. Previously, he had repeatedly addressed them as respected guests, allowing them to enjoy fully the royal treatment, yet now his attitude had changed completely, and he kept shouting at them. This change was really too massive. Ling Han sneered internally. The reason why the ancient castle's people had been so courteous was merely because they wanted them to switch to cultivating the other system of cultivation, and before achieving their motive, they would naturally be incredibly cordial. However, the appearance of this beast tide seemed to have disrupted their plans. "If we cannot beat the beast tide, all of us will be dead," Xiao Jun continued. These words were filled with impact. Everyone hurriedly jumped up, and quickly ran outside. Xiao Jun suddenly turned his head, and solemnly said to Ling Han, "Brother Ling, please give your all." Ling Han smiled and said, "We are in the same boat. We naturally should be working together." "All right." The two of them were the last to walk out. When they walked out of the ancient castle, they saw that the people of the ancient castle had all moved out, and were going towards the west. 3 sides of Ascent Route Island end in a steep cliff, where killing formations are placed. The beast tide cannot charge upwards along cliffs, and can only bulldoze from the western coast, Xiao Jun explained. Furthermore, Qin Wei and the others had previously felt curious why there would be a beast tide on the seas. These people had always traveled on the boundless seas, so they should have considerable experience, but even they had never known the fact that there would be beast tides on the seas. Why would it happen on this tiny island then? Just exactly what secrets were hidden on this small island? Ling Han suddenly became extremely curious. Chapter 2019. Firm Essence Green Gold. As Ling Han's thoughts whirled, he arrived on the western coast of the island. The moment he arrived, he was immediately stunned by the scene that met his eyes. This was too grandiose. Marine creatures that numbered in the tens of thousands were presently surging towards the island. Some were already closely approaching, and were presently launching a fierce offensive. For example, a walrus that was 3,000 meters tall was presently using its gigantic body to crash into the island. Only a single collision, and the whole island would tremble, as if it was about to be fragmented by the crash. Or another example. A massive lobster was using its twin pincers to send out slashes onto the coast. Multiple seals of Tao covered its pincers, shining brilliantly. However, the island had also long since set up the first line of defense, stopping these marine creatures from invading further. Furthermore, though there were a great many marine creatures, and they were very big, their quality was quite unevenly spread out, and only a few rare ones were really strong. Thus, strictly speaking, they had only come to deliver themselves to death. A resident of the island sent out a punch, and a black-colored flame blazed. One punch was capable of insta-killing 10 marine creatures. Another waved a sword in a slash, and again black-colored sword chi filled the skies. Blood spurted in all directions, and masses of marine creatures collapsed. There were also powerful marine creatures among the tide, like a golden yellow frog. As it opened its mouth, it would send out golden light that turned into golden arrows. Xiao, 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 wherever it landed, it would immediately cause a great many island residents to suffer severe injury. "Let me!" A loud shout rang out, and Lan Tianyu charged out, blocking this giant frog, and they both began an intense battle. And there were fierce battles taking place everywhere on this western coast. There was a very large gap in strength among the marine creatures, but there was no shortage of elites among them. There was an immortal palace tear clam that created a terrifying hurricane capable of destroying everything as it opened and closed its shell. There was also a 6-legged green crocodile that spat out seals capable of shaking the heavens and shattering the ground from its mouth. Intense battles were happening everywhere. No one could slack off. And what was more frightening was that there were endless marine creatures that were presently surging over from the depths of the seas. It was just like the people on this island had killed their king, or their prince, and they were now here to get revenge at all costs. Merely a day had passed, and the coast of the island was already covered with corpses. Blood had dyed the waters of the surrounding area red. However, those that had died were basically all the marine creatures, and the casualties on the side of the humans were still 0. But those like Qin Wei and the others were already running out of origin power. Furthermore, they were continuously drawing on the power of regulation. Their spirits were also weary and battered, and their battle prowess could possibly drop from the peak to rock bottom at any moment. The exertion in the battle was too harsh. Otherwise, with the accumulation of origin power that a celestial had, they could at least continue fighting for more than half a year's time. Just think of how they had previously encountered the giant tsunami, and one would know. It had only been several hundred waves, and the formations had sucked all of them dry, causing them to collapse in fatigue. On the other hand, those on the ancient castle side were all still looking very energetic, and there was completely no display of weariness. This was the amazing trait of the other system of cultivation, or was it a benefit of believing in that deity? This place was also preparing a sacrifice. While what was being sacrificed was naturally these marine creatures, what was the sacrifice meant for? Small Tower did not speak further. Instead, it channeled the Black Tower. Instantly, a majestic power surged up, actually causing all the marine creatures to tremble and cease their attacks at the same time. In the boundless sea, practically all the living creatures had not gained intelligence, and they were all in the primal state. But the more primitive they were, the more sensitive these marine creatures were to powerful beings. For them, the Black Tower was a supreme existence. However, it was only a mere instant, and when the power of the Black Tower surged over, the marine creatures regained their ferocity and began to launch a fierce offensive once more. Brat, while you are a bringer of calamity, your luck seems to be extraordinarily good. Small Tower spoke again. Are you praising me, commending me, or complimenting me? Ling Han asked with a grin. Your skin is really quite thick. Hee hee.
Small Tower paused and continued, there is a source power of heaven and earth beneath this island.
What? Ling Han got a shock. Really?
He naturally would not suspect Small Tower. While this guy was at Sundra, there seemed to have never been any previous instance in which it had been joking, and would never use this kind of matter to deceive him.
What type is it? He asked quickly.
Metal element, Small Tower said. Firm essence green gold.
Metal element.
Ling Han's heart involuntarily jolted. He already had 3 source powers of heaven and earth, and they were water, fire, and wood, and now if he could gain another metal element source power of heaven and earth, he would be one step closer to having 9 source powers of heaven and earth to complete his dividing soul tier.
Hold on, you were speaking about sacrifice just now.
Could it be that sacrifice is for the sake of retrieving the firm essence green gold? The nature of metal element is violent and murderous, so to retrieve this source power of heaven and earth, you would have to first remove the air of violence of the firm essence green gold. Otherwise, this would be equivalent to having a celestial king blast his aura madly. Not even ascending origin tier could stand against that. Moreover, the people on the seas have never heard of beast tides, but it has suddenly broken out here.
This means
this beast tide is possibly artificially engineered for the purpose of obtaining enough materials for sacrifice. Though it has not been proven yet, if there really was a source power of heaven and earth here, and a metal element one at that, then there is a 99% chance that this deduction is not wrong. Ling Han stopped his thoughts from wandering, and asked Small Tower, then has this source power of heaven and earth reached a time it can be retrieved?
Almost, Small Tower said.
This kind of sacrifice would have to continue for at least over 1,000,000 years. Only then would the sharp air of violence drop to rock bottom. It could possibly be this time, it could also possibly need another 2 to 3 times, and only then could it be retrieved. However, success would still have to depend on fortune. Removing the air of violence was only the first step. Winning won the opportunity to show his face in front of the source power of heaven and earth, but it did not represent completely that it could be retrieved by then. However, without the opportunity to show one's face, there was even less possibility of retrieving it. Lan Ruaji said that they had only been on this island for several million years. Then, it is highly possible that they were the first to discover that this place houses the firm essence green gold, and that was why they settled down here. And then, through a great many years of study, they came up with this method of sacrifice. Though I still have not met that island master, but judging from his actions, he should be a smart man who plans before he moves. Furthermore, this alternate system of cultivation may have some other strange factor to it that could allow him to retrieve the source power of heaven and earth. I had already planned to cause a great disturbance. If I could ruin the plans of that island master for retrieving the firm essence green gold, or even if I myself could retrieve it, that would not be too bad.
Ling Han's eyes lit up. He could not possibly stop this sacrificial rite.
Though dividing soul tier monarch tiers were indeed very strong, against an immortal palace tier, there was still no way he could match the opponent, what more when there were also ascending origin tier elites on the other side too. Even if he took out the poisonous fruit of the red-spotted green bamboo, he would still be unable to succeed. Then why not just add fuel to the fire, and he himself could retrieve this source power of heaven and earth? That was what he had decided on doing. Ling Han roared, and was just planning to push his battle prowess to full throttle when he saw a man suddenly leap over, and directly send a sword slash in his direction.
Die!
Chapter 2020. Rival in Love. Ling Han had a great many enemies, but to have someone he had never even seen before suddenly deliver a fatal attack against him made him feel extremely curious. He casually sent out a kick, and with a ding, that sneak attacker's sword flew out of his grip. That was a pretty boy, his skin so fine that it could induce envy in a great many women. His appearance was also considerably handsome. However, he was a little weak, and could only be at 4th severance at most. Ling Han's expression was calm as he asked, "Why did you want to kill me?" "You are my rival in love, so isn't it reasonable that I want to kill you?" that pretty boy countered, his head raised high.
Rival in love? Ling Han was surprised. When did he have such a rival in love like this?
"Hold on, Lan Ruaji." He couldn't help but shake his head and said, I think you have misunderstood.
Really?
That pretty boy made no further move, and took 2 steps forwards. You really won't try to contest with me over Ruaji? When he uttered the last word, he suddenly moved again, his right hand forming claws as he mercilessly delivered a claw strike at Ling Han's chest.
This brat was really sly.
Ling Han sent out another kick, landing solidly between the legs of that pretty boy.
Ow!
The pretty boy immediately released a pained yowl, his body involuntarily crumbling. His hands covered his crotch as layers of cold sweat flowed down his forehead. I really could not tell that a person that looked so fair would be so black-hearted,
Ling Han said.
The pretty boy was already incapable of speech. This kick was not just strong in force, but also contained a sliver of regulations of heaven and earth. To Ling Han, this was just a sliver, but to a 4th severance, this tiny sliver was already earth-shattering. Veins popped on the pretty boy's forehead, and after a while he finally said, "It's you who are too stupid."
I'm stupid.
Ling Han shook his head, and then sent out a punch. Pa! The pretty boy was instantly turned into a shower of blood from the blow. Since he had made a move on him, then he should have prepared himself to be killed in return.
Xiao, 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 xiao.
Another 7 people pounced out, charging towards Ling Han.
Die!
Though the 7 of them did not look the same, they all had one shared trait, and that was that they all looked especially handsome. Furthermore, they were all fair and smooth in complexion, every single one of them pretty boys. Fuck, these shouldn't all be Lan Ruaji's lovers, right? Ling Han felt disgust rise up in his heart. Just what kind of **** conflict had he gotten himself involved in? Moreover, these lovers were a little too merciless, weren't they? They hadn't even truly met yet, and they were already wanting to kill him. Ling Han shook his head, sending out a punch. Fiery flames blazed, and instantly turned the 7 of them into dust. This also intimidated the others, and they did not dare pounce over again. They were indeed Lan Ruaji's lovers, and in Lan Ruaji's harem, her lovers were allowed to attack each other fatally. This was a kind of pleasure in Lan Ruaji's eyes as she delighted in how her lovers would fly into a rage out of jealousy in front of her while they attacked each other violently in secret. If that hadn't been the case, the number of her lovers would have long since exceeded 100 instead of merely these dozen and some at present.
Afterwards, this had become a custom. Every time there would be a new entry, all her lovers would work together to deal with him.
If they could kill him, they would have one less competitor for her affections. However, this time, they had clearly met their match. Ling Han was indescribably strong. This was really disgusting. Ling Han mocked endlessly. He had not thought that he had just said a few words to Lan Ruaji, and he was already embroiled in this kind of farce. If this spread out, he would definitely be laughed at and ridiculed. To think that he would actually be striving for favor with a bunch of pretty boys.
Fuck!
Ling Han's figure charged out, his battle prowess on full throttle. The 9 heavens flame-divided soul had also been brought into play. Fiery flames blazed, sword chi sword, and the rate of slaughter was astonishingly high. The marine creature's attacks came in wave after wave, as if there was no end to it. To say nothing of the others, even Ling Han himself could feel a weariness rise up in him.
Next shift.
An austere voice rang out, and a new batch of people came out from the ancient castle, switching shifts with the people who were already fully expended from the battle, and continuing to battle fiercely with the marine creatures. Once everyone retreated, they collapsed onto the ground, feeling an incredible soreness in every single bone of their bodies. Ling Han also took advantage of the time to recover his origin power. He had cultivated every cultivation level to complete perfection, so he had a continuous supply of power, was far more capable of exertion than the others in the same cultivation level, and his recovery rate was also much faster.
3 days later, they had another change of shift. Qin Wei and the others were incredibly gloomy.
They had not enjoyed any benefits yet, but already had to work hard. But if they didn't, it wouldn't do, either. Once these marine creatures broke through the lines of defense, all of them would be dead. This was like a war that had no end. Every marine creature was fearless of death, and tried its best to barrage against the lines of defense of the island, and the island residents were also putting their all into resistance, causing Ascent Route Island to become a slaughterhouse. What reassured Qin Wei and the rest was that, at least up to the present, there were only injuries, and no deaths. This was very inconceivable. Under such a powerful offensive, there were actually no deaths on their side. At first, Ling Han had not noticed, but he soon discovered this fact. Thus, he placed his attention on the others as well, and realized that it was not they that were lucky, but that when someone encountered a deadly danger, those marine creatures would die for some inconceivable reason. In such chaotic battles, this was not very obvious, but as long as one paid attention, he would definitely realize this. Ling Han couldn't help but turn and look in the direction of the ancient castle. So far, that mysterious island master still had not appeared. Perhaps it was he that was interfering from the shadows, and thus ensured that no one died. An ascending origin tier elite absolutely had that kind of ability. Why did he have to save them then? Very simple. Every single person here was a student of the alternate cultivation system, and would spread it out, so how could they be easily sacrificed? The alternate system of cultivation would cause damage to the regulations of the heaven and earth, and would be strictly forbidden by all forces. When it was taught, it had to be done secretly, and thus was in more dire need of manpower. On one side, that island master needed people to help him prepare the sacrifice, slaughtering marine creatures, and on another, he also had to protect the people here so that they could spread out that new cultivation system, and that was what led to the present situation. Linking all the cause and effect of the situation together, Ling Han thought that his deduction could explain everything very well, so he was sure that his deduction was correct. "Why is the beast tide so fierce this time?" a native complained. "That's right. In the past, it would last 2 to 3 days at most, but this time, it's already been close to 10 days. If this goes on, everyone won't be able to hold on much longer. Why hasn't Lord Island Master appeared yet? With him changing the flow of the tides, we should be able to win easily." Yet Ling Han understood why in his mind. That Island Master had to be managing the ceremony for the sacrifice. Perhaps he did not trust any other person, so he did not even participate in the battles, and would only occasionally emerge to save someone. Since the time period of the beast tide this time has exceeded previous times, and Small Tower has also said that removing the murderous aura of the firm essence green gold would also need another 2 to 3 rounds of sacrifices, then it is very possible that that island master wants to succeed with this one time, and that was why he has extended the time period for the beast tide. Hee, looks like I too should make my move. Chapter 2021. Searching for firm essence green gold. Ling Han didn't know how the people on the island had triggered the beast tide. However, since they could trigger it, they could naturally cause it to continue. This didn't worry Ling Han. Right now, he was simply concerned with how to obtain that source power of heaven and earth. The battle continued, and the sea creatures continued to surge forth. They had complete disregard for their own life and death, and they simply yearned to break through the defenses. 10 days, 15 days. On the 17th day, Ling Han suddenly felt the pressure easing. The beast tide is weakening. There are no new sea creatures charging over. It's finally about to end. We've finally held them back. Everyone faltered for a moment before feeling a rush of delight. Even though they were exhausted, it was a miracle that not a single one of them had been killed during the intense battle. "We're being protected by a deity," someone immediately said with a devout expression. Their words resonated with everyone else, and they all nodded in agreement. After annihilating the final wave of the beast tide, they all kneeled down to pray toward the ancient castle. Qin Wei and the others exchanged a glance. Even though they hadn't enjoyed a buff from the deity, it was true that not a single one of them had died during the battle. As such, how could they not regard this as a miracle? Several of them immediately kneeled down in prayer. Meanwhile, several of them remained standing. They hadn't obtained any benefits, and they had instead fought a battle for the sake of others first. That being the case, they naturally couldn't bring themselves to kneel down. Ling Han silently stepped back. The retreat of the beast tide also signified that the sacrificial offering was nearing its end. It was time to collect that source power of heaven and earth. Small Tower, lead the way. He arrived behind a huge boulder, where he directly broke through the ground, and tunneled into the earth. The firm essence green gold was buried deep beneath the ground. If Ling Han had practiced the regulations of earth, he wouldn't have needed to tunnel through the earth in such a crude manner. By channeling the Tao of Earth, tunneling through the ground would have been like soaring through the sky. Now, however, he had no choice but to use this crude method to forge a path. Fortunately, his physique was tough enough, and his power was also strong enough. As he tunneled down, the stone and earth before him were much like water. They would affect his speed, but not to a significant degree. Small Tower pointed out the correct path, and Ling Han followed its guidance. After descending thousands of meters underground, he finally started to feel some resistance. The earth had become firmer, and it was incredibly hard and tough. Rather than being composed of dirt and stone, it was as if it had been forged from divine metal. A thought occurred to Ling Han. By the looks of it, he was most likely nearing the firm essence green gold. Under the influence of this source power of heaven and earth, even the surrounding terrain had become as stiff as metal. Then under the influence of the firm essence green gold, might this dirt have transformed into genuine metal? Or even godly metal? Ling Han immediately drew his divine demon sword. First of all, he wanted to see whether his divine demon sword could absorb the metallic element contained within the earth. Second of all, wielding the divine demon sword would allow him to travel at a quicker speed. In terms of destructive ability alone, the divine demon sword was superior to him. With this hope in his mind, the divine demon sword immediately thrust forward. Wang! The pseudo-celestial sword shuddered slightly. At the same time, the surrounding earth started to dazzle, glowing at times and dimming at others. It was as if the earth were breathing. My speculation was right. Ling Han faltered upon seeing this. He was then overcome with delight. The earth in this region had all transformed into godly metal. Moreover, it might have even reached the level of pseudo-divine metal. It was because of this that he found it increasingly difficult to advance. To the divine demon sword, however, this was a delectable feast. This is incredible. Small Tower, what exactly is devouring metal? Ling Han couldn't help but ask. Divine metal. Moreover, there's a sliver of chance that it can surpass all divine metal in the future, becoming a peerless existence, Small Tower replied in a calm voice. So you're saying that it can engulf divine metal and continue to advance? Finally, you're not stupid beyond saving, Small Tower said. It was clearly praising him, yet Ling Han couldn't feel joy no matter what. How extravagant. Divine metal. Even celestial kings couldn't necessarily obtain such a matter to forge a celestial tool. However, the divine demon sword needed to be nurtured by divine metal such that it could continue to grow. Absorbing divine metal to grow. Even retards would understand the freakish nature of this. Ling Han couldn't help but yearn for that time. When he became a celestial king, a high-level celestial king, he could perhaps give this a try. If he could truly obtain a transcendent celestial tool, wouldn't that be fun? Ling Han chuckled to himself. He was getting way too ahead of himself. The first step was to transform the divine demon sword into a genuine celestial tool. Ling Han, you're not celebrating with everyone else, and you're instead wandering around here by yourself. Perhaps you're doing something shameful? Someone sneered in a cold voice. A person suddenly appeared behind him. Lan Tianyu. Chapter 2022. Battle with Lan Tianyu. Lan Tianyu's black hair was flowing and untied, and this gave him the charisma of an unrestrained and wild individual. Lan Tianyu, Ling Han said with a nod. He sheathed his sword as he turned around to face this powerful opponent. Lan Tianyu cracked a smile and said, I heard Xiao Jun say that you tried to lead others astray in the resting room. At that time, I already realized that you were unreliable, so I decided to keep an eye on you. Sure enough, I discovered that you immediately vanished after the battle. After looking around for a while, I've finally found you again. So what? Ling Han asked in a calm voice. Since he had been discovered, they would simply resolve this with a battle. Was he afraid? I knew that a person like you couldn't possibly be subdued. You simply put up a show so you could save your own skin. However, I'm truly very curious.
Why have you suddenly decided to tunnel underground? Perhaps you discovered something? Lan Tianyu asked in curiosity.
Ling Han smiled and said,
Oh, there's something underground? Perhaps this is some secret?
Lan Tianyu stared at Ling Han for a moment before saying, even though I find this hard to believe, I have to concede that a person like you won't do something for no good reason.
So, you definitely discovered something, am I correct?
Discovered something?
Ling Han replied with a faint smile. Lan Tianyu was trying to pry information from Ling Han.
He wanted to see if Ling Han had truly discovered the source power of heaven and earth that was hidden underground. If he had discovered it, then it was extremely likely that he wasn't acting alone. Instead, he was most likely being supported by some powerful figure. If that were the case, then they definitely couldn't let their guard down. To say nothing of the fact that their island master was only at the ascending origin tier, above which there was still the celestial king tier. What would it matter even if their island master were at the celestial king tier? They were like pests of heaven and earth, pests that were hunted and despised by everyone.
There's a source power of heaven and earth here, Lan Tianyu said slowly.
He stared at Ling Han as he said this, examining the minute changes in his expression. However, Ling Han remained calm and composed, and he said, I'm also very curious. Your elder brother is at the ascending origin tier, so why are you such a disappointment?
How are you only at the dividing soul tier?
Lan Tianyu humphed and said, my progress is slow because I'm reaching the level of perfection for each cultivation level. When I advance to the 9th lotus, which is equivalent to the ascending origin tier, I'll be invincible among those at my cultivation level. Ling Han couldn't help but bend down in laughter.
Say, can you stop being so self-confident?
Your aptitude is indeed slightly stronger than that of those at the king tier. You can just barely be considered as an emperor tier. However, once you can't draw on external power, what right will you have to stand here and say that you're invincible among those at the same cultivation level? Trash like you then is abundant in the eastern and western celestial realm.
This was naturally an exaggeration.
To say nothing of emperor tiers, even king tiers were rare in the 2 celestial realms. However, as a top-tier monarch tier, Ling Han often came across fellow prodigies at the same level. As such, he naturally felt like such prodigies were abundant in number.
Lan Tianyu exploded in rage upon hearing this.
He stared daggers at Ling Han, and a strong killing intent exuded from his body. He had always been proud of his talent and aptitude, and he thought nothing of all other prodigies. It was because he was stuck in this place that he hadn't been able to make a name for himself. Now, however, Ling Han actually dared to belittle his talent.
He couldn't endure this. He definitely couldn't endure this.
You actually dare to question my talent? He asked in rage. Ling Han scoffed and said, right now, I'm at the late stage of Yang Soul.
What cultivation level are you at?
Not only that, but even after drawing on the power of the *TTY deity or whatnot, you're still unable to defeat me. What right do you have to mention the words, talent before me?
Lan Tianyu was rendered speechless.
His cultivation level was equivalent to the peak stage of Yin Soul. However, without the power of the deity, his battle prowess would only be invincible among those at Earth Soul. It was still some way off from reaching Heaven Soul. Compared to Ling Han, he was indeed far inferior. Ling Han was truly a prodigy. Moreover, he was far more talented than Lan Tianyu. This caused the latter to feel wild with jealousy. Since he was inferior, he would simply kill Ling Han. That way, there would be no one who was more prodigious than him.
I initially planned to spare you.
However, you're seeking death yourself.
Lan Tianyu said in a baleful voice.
Ling Han roared with laughter as he brandished his divine demon sword. Then come battle.
With a flash, he charged at Lan Tianyu.
During their previous battle, Lan Tianyu had enjoyed a small advantage. This wasn't because Ling Han was weaker, but it was because the latter hadn't wanted to unleash his trump cards. However, a battle to the death was different. He would unleash his full power to annihilate his opponent. Most importantly, the divine demon sword had advanced to the level of 4-star pseudo-celestial tool. This was equivalent to reaching Heaven's Soul.
Whoosh!
With a single slash, space was severed and clouds were obliterated. The surrounding earth was instantly shattered into nothingness.
Lan Tianyu was astonished. Ling Han's cultivation was clearly unchanged, yet his battle prowess had surprisingly become several times more powerful. This was simply inconceivable. It was that sword. A mere sword can actually elevate your battle prowess by so much? How astonishing! Lan Tianyu's feeling of jealousy became even stronger. His opponent was more talented than him, and he even possessed a peerless divine sword. "It's mine," he roared. Boom! He became enveloped in a black aura, and a black lotus with 7 petals also materialized between his brows. He immediately launched a counterattack. Boom! Ling Han's sword slashed down, and Lan Tianyu was instantly sent flying, crashing into the wall with a thundering boom. This collision sent him flying back, and he couldn't help but shudder due to the forceful impact. He felt as uncomfortable as could be. At this moment, Ling Han had already caught up, and he immediately launched another slash. Lan Tianyu had no time to feel astonished, and he could only spit a burst of black air with a loud roar. This burst of air transformed into a violent column of flames, amid which a black symbol was materializing. This wasn't a symbol of the Great Tao. Ling Han was certain of this. After all, this symbol was completely different from the Great Tao of heaven and earth that he understood. If this had been a symbol of the Great Tao, it would have intertwined and resonated with the regulations of heaven and earth. Hang on! Ling Han could sense mysterious power traveling over from above them, from the direction of the ancient castle. This power was fusing together with the black symbol, causing it to become more powerful. Boom! The black symbol smashed over with terrifying power. Ling Han sneered upon seeing this. He then clenched his fists and replied with a punch. Boom! The shock wave of the collision caused the newly created cave to shudder violently, with stone debris and dust raining down. It was as if the cave were about to collapse at any moment. "Haha! Your strength is only a... Watch how I behead you!" Lan Tianyu said with a loud laugh. Without his divine sword, Ling Han's battle prowess was no different from before. Since he had been able to enjoy an advantage before, he could naturally replicate the same feat again. "Is that so?" Ling Han said. He launched a flurry of punches, showing no signs of shirking from Lan Tianyu's attacks. He would face his attacks head-on. He still needed to obtain the source power of heaven and earth, so he had no time to waste here. That being the case, he would end this battle as quickly as possible. He would end the life of his opponent. "You're seeking death," Lan Tianyu said with a cold sneer. He was enjoying the protection of a deity, so his defenses were as powerful as could be. As such, facing him head-on would be nothing more than seeking death. "I hope you can remain stubborn until the very end," Ling Han said with a smile. Pang! 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 They exchanged a flurry of punches in quick succession. Lan Tianyu couldn't help but feel shocked. This was because his bones were already creaking under stress. However, Ling Han was still completely unscathed. "How is this possible?" "Why, you're wearing some kind of protective armor!" Lan Tianyu exclaimed. He didn't dare to face Ling Han head-on anymore. In his mind, there was only a single answer to Ling Han's defenses being stronger than his. Ling Han scoffed upon hearing this, and he couldn't be bothered explaining. Instead, he summoned his 9 heavens flame divided soul. Normally, this divided soul would comprehend the great Tao under the reincarnation tree, allowing Ling Han to continually improve his cultivation. At this moment, Ling Han unleashed his heaven-destroying 9 swords, while his divided soul was bathed in flames as it scorched heaven and earth with the 9 heavens flame. "We discovered you people long ago, and we noticed that there was no ascending origin tier elite among you. It was because of this that we allowed you onto the island. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to discover this island even if you'd searched for it your entire life. Similarly, without my guidance, you'll find that you can't leave this island at all. No matter how you sail, you'll only be able to go in circles in the nearby sea. You'll never be able to leave." Ling Han replied with an "Oh." Sure enough, apart from the giant storm, everything else had been the doing of these islanders. He smiled and said, Thank you for telling me. However, I've still decided to kill you. Why? Lan Tianyu stammered. He was completely stunned by Ling Han's decision. Why was there such a strange person in the world? Why did he insist on seeking death?
Because I won't die,
Ling Han said in a calm voice. He was brimming with confidence. Where is your confidence coming from? Lan Tianyu felt like he was about to go crazy. How had he come across such a person? Ling Han was only at the dividing soul tier, yet he actually dared to be so confident and cocky.
No, you'll definitely die.
You'll definitely die a miserable death, he roared. After learning that Ling Han was intent on killing him, he finally gave up on all hope. He did everything he could to break free. After all, staying put would only mean dying a little slower. If he fought with his life, he might still have a sliver of a chance to survive. However, this was naturally a futile struggle.
Pooh!
Ling Han's sword pierced Lan Tianyu's chest.
Before an expression of despair could even spread across Lan Tianyu's face, the flaming fist of the Nine Heavens' flame-divided soul had already smashed over.
Boom! With a crack, Lan Tianyu's head exploded into smithereens. However, not a single drop of blood sprayed into the surroundings. This was because they were instantly vaporized by the scorching flames.
Ling Han retracted his sword and drew his Nine Heavens' flame-divided soul back into the Black Tower, where it would continue to cultivate.
Such a lengthy delay. But it should be fine, right?
Ling Han murmured to himself. He continued to hurriedly advance with his sword.
After another hour or so, he suddenly felt his body tilting forward slightly. To his surprise, there was no more resistance before him. However, a dividing soul tier elite naturally wouldn't fall so easily. He immediately steadied himself. A path surprisingly appeared before him. Ling Han came to a sudden realization.
This was a path that had been dug out by the residents of this island. Lying at the end of this path was naturally the firm essence green gold.
What a coincidence! Ling Han nodded upon seeing this.
He had forged his own path while searching for the firm essence green gold, and his path had coincidentally intersected with the path that the residents of the island had dug.
The chances of this happening were most likely very minuscule. However, it had happened to him. Ling Han concealed the path that he had created before continuing down the one created by the residents. At this moment, he didn't need to use his divine demon sword to absorb the regulations of metal anymore. Instead, he could advance at a brisk pace. After another 30 minutes, the area in front of him suddenly opened up. This was a colossal cave.
The radius of this cave measured 3,000 meters or so, and its depth was more so extremely astonishing.
Before Ling Han could even lean forward to observe this cave, a burst of murderous aura suddenly rose from its depths and slashed into the roof, where it left a deep gash. What devastating destructive ability!
Ling Han was already well aware of the composition of this place.
Dirt and stone had already transformed into metal, and they were as stiff and tough as could be. Even his full power strike could only leave a small dent in the wall. Only by using his divine demon sword to absorb the regulations of metal of the surroundings could he hope to cause any significant damage.
However, this burst of murderous aura had managed to leave a gash of several feet deep in the roof of the cave.
This was truly terrifying. The firm essence green gold was definitely at the bottom of this cave. Ling Han immediately leaped forward. Whoosh! He then immediately entered the Black Tower. Allowing gravity to do its work, the Black Tower instantly plunged down. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Bursts of murderous aura continued to slash over from the bottom of the cave.
However, because the Black Tower was far too small, it was naturally incredibly difficult for it to be hit.
However, there were still times when the Black Tower was hit, causing it to strike the sides of the cave before bouncing back and continuing to fall. Like a pebble thrown down a well, the Black Tower continued to ping-pong back and forth. Only after a whopping 2 hours did it finally come to rest. It had reached the bottom. This cave was truly very deep. Moreover, this place was still huge, with a radius of 1,500 meters or so. In the center region, there rested a piece of green metal. Right now, a middle-aged man was standing 30 or so meters away from it.
Chapter 2024. Astonishing Conversation. This middle-aged man looked no different from normal people, and there was no aura of power or dominance about him. If there were anything unusual about him, then it was the black lotus symbol between his brows. This was a lotus with 9 petals, and it was so black that one couldn't help but feel apprehension. Is this the island master? Ling Han observed him from within the black tower.
He didn't act rashly.
The firm essence green gold was right before him, and he could already feel its boundless might even though he was still inside the black tower. Metal, this was a matter that possessed a razor-sharp, murderous aura. It was capable of annihilating all matter. Ling Han couldn't help but frown. The firm essence green gold was right before him, but how was he going to obtain it?
Leave the black tower? That would be seeking death.
Fortunately, the middle-aged man wasn't showing signs of trying to obtain the firm essence green gold anytime soon, either.
Whoosh!
At this moment, a figure suddenly descended into the cave, avoiding the bursts of murderous auras as it did so. This person landed beside the middle-aged man. This person also had a lotus with 9 petals between his brows.
Brother Che,
the middle-aged man said with a nod. The new arrival was also a middle-aged man. However, he was more solidly built, and he stared at the firm essence green gold as he said, Brother Lon, we've already waited for several million years.
Now, it's finally time to reap the rewards.
Heh, we haven't wasted all these years either. With this island as our base, we've sent many people into the outside world to spread the magnificence of our religion, the first middle-aged man said with a chuckle. He was none other than the island master, Lon Tianyang. The other middle-aged man was called Che Yuanhua. He also chuckled before saying, the world is filled with foolish people. Even though the cultivation system of our sect is more powerful, they still resist it with such passion and fervor. They almost destroyed our sect, so we have no choice but to act covertly.
These days are nearing an end. We're about to write a new chapter in history.
Their eyes were gleaming, and they appeared as excited as could be. After obtaining this source power of heaven and earth, Sect Master will definitely reward us richly.
At that time, we might be able to reach the 10th lotus.
Ling Han was astounded upon hearing this. This was a large organization.
Ascent Route Island was only the tip of the iceberg. 10th lotus?
Both of these people had a lotus with 9 petals between their brows. Following this logic, the 10th lotus would allow their lotuses to gain another petal. Lan Ruaji had mentioned that the island master was at a cultivation level equivalent to the ascending origin tier. Since he was at the 9th lotus, the 10th lotus would most likely mean reaching the consummate level of the ascending origin tier.
Perhaps it might even equate to the celestial king tier.
Moreover, even the dispatched individuals were at the ascending origin tier, so just what cultivation level were the higher-ups of the sect at?
What cultivation level was the sect master at?
Judging from their conversation, members of their sect had already entered the eastern and western celestial realms, where they were spreading this new cultivation system and popularizing their deity. However, perhaps this was only occurring among those at lower cultivation levels, and it was because of this that Ling Han hadn't been aware of it. However, one had to realize that even though elites were mighty and domineering, with celestial kings being able to decide the fate of a battle, it was those at the lower levels who were the true foundation of heaven and earth. If the majority of lower-level beings transitioned to this new cultivation system, this expanse of heaven and earth wouldn't be far from collapse and destruction.
However, Ling Han found this extremely strange.
If this expanse of heaven and earth collapsed, what good would that be to these people? Or perhaps they weren't aware of their own danger at all. Perhaps the allure of power had clouded their judgment. That being the case, what force was trying to destroy this world?
Ling Han was struck with astonishment.
Ling Han already possessed 3 source powers of heaven and earth, so he could clearly feel his distaste toward this mystical power. Like fire and water, these 2 powers were things that couldn't coexist. Victory of one power would signify the destruction of the other power. Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were indeed not powerful enough. However, after drawing on the power of the stone statues, they could even destroy a source power of heaven and earth. This was far too astounding. Destroying a source power of heaven and earth is equivalent to dealing a severe blow to heaven and earth, small tower said in a calm voice. Source powers of heaven and earth were equivalent to children of heaven and earth. Thus, destroying them would wound heaven and earth, and it would bring great grief upon heaven and earth. This was a destructive blow. Ling Han couldn't allow them to continue. He planned to draw on the power of the Black Tower to fight against them. Even if he couldn't obtain the source power of heaven and earth, he could still at least distract Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang. That way, they wouldn't be able to destroy the firm essence green gold with such ease. He was indeed not powerful enough. However, the Black Tower wasn't weak. After all, this had been the treasure of a heavenly venerate. Boom! Right at this moment, a column of light suddenly descended from above him.
A person then descended from the sky.
Xiao Gu.
Chapter 2025. Reappearance of Xiao Gu. A figure directly charged down from the sky above the island.
They smashed through the thick earth, and they appeared at the bottom of this cave like a god.
Along with them, they also brought the dazzling light of the starry sky. This was a spectacular sight. Moreover, to Ling Han's surprise, he actually recognized this person. It was Xiao Gu, who should have been in the ancient realm. Ling Han's mouth was slightly agape. It was clear that he was struck with shock. When he had needed to open the gates to the celestial realm, he had once invited Xiao Gu to come along with him. However, Xiao Gu had insisted on remaining in the ancient realm. It was seemingly because he had some unfinished business there. Now, however, he had actually appeared here so suddenly. This was completely beyond Ling Han's imagination. Moreover, Xiao Gu was so powerful now that even Ling Han couldn't determine his exact cultivation.
"Yaya!"
Xiao Gu exclaimed. After so many years, he still hadn't changed much. His speech was still like that of an infant, yet his power was simply heaven-defying. His descending fist was filled with power and dominance. Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were astonished by his sudden arrival. It was clear that they hadn't expected a person to suddenly descend from the sky. They hurriedly launched attacks to block Xiao Gu.
Boom!
Xiao Gu was sent flying up by this exchange. Meanwhile, Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were pushed down into the ground. In fact, their feet had already sunk into the ground.
One had to realize that the earth here had been transformed into metal by the firm essence green gold, so it was as tough as could be.
Yet, the attack of Xiao Gu had actually caused them to sink into the ground. This was a perfect reflection of the overwhelming nature of Xiao Gu's punch.
"Yaya! Da! Da! Da!"
Xiao Gu exclaimed. His appearance was no different from before, and he hadn't undergone any changes after becoming more powerful. He charged down from the sky again, launching another punch. Several symbols of the great Tao bloomed around him. Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang exchanged a glance. They could see the shock and confusion in each other's eyes. This island was being protected by a formation, and it was as concealed as could be. As long as they didn't actively deactivate this formation, even low-level celestial kings wouldn't be able to discover it. This was the major reason why this island remained so mysterious. It was not because of its small size. Powerful elites couldn't discover this island at all. Meanwhile, weaker cultivators wouldn't need to think about leaving if they arrived on this island. Even if they could leave, they would have already become a member of this island. Yet, this mysterious elite was clearly only at the ascending origin tier. That being the case, how had he discovered Ascent Route Island?
"We can't let him escape,"
Lan Tianyang said.
Che
Yuanhua nodded in agreement. Their sect couldn't be exposed, so they had to dispose of all people who weren't part of them. The two elites didn't simply defend this time. Instead, they unleashed all kinds of secret techniques to attack Xiao Gu. It was clear that they were part of the same cultivation system. Even though there were slight differences, their foundation was still ultimately the same. The lotus petals on their foreheads blossomed, with each blossoming petal causing their battle prowess to rise by another level. Xiao Gu was facing two elites by himself, yet he wasn't being pushed onto his back foot at all. One of his bones was glowing, and it summoned a dazzling symbol of the great Tao that bestowed him with boundless power.
Fuck!
How is Xiao Gu's strength advancing so quickly?
Ling Han was already very proud of his quick advance in cultivation level.
Compared to Xiao Gu, however, he was still lagging very far behind.
That glowing bone of Xiao Gu was definitely the bone of a celestial king. Otherwise, how could it be so vicious and powerful? Right now, it could even rival the power of ascending origin tier elites. In any case, he could seize this opportunity to obtain the firm essence green gold. Ling Han silently exited the Black Tower. He then channeled the indestructible Heaven Scroll, and it was as if he were a blooming flower trying to attract the attention of a pollinating bee. Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were both deeply astonished by the sudden appearance of another person. With their strength, they surprisingly hadn't discovered that Ling Han had been hiding near them the entire time. Moreover, this person was only a measly dividing soul tier cultivator. They wanted to stop Ling Han, yet Xiao Gu was far too vicious and powerful. He blocked their path, disallowing them from approaching Ling Han. However, they immediately calmed down. Even they had to rely on the power of the deity if they wanted to obtain the source power of heaven and earth. So how could a measly dividing soul tier cultivator succeed? Meanwhile, Xiao Gu was definitely a formidable foe who they had to treat with utmost care. They had to dispose of Xiao Gu first. Ling Han. Xiao Gu stammered. His voice was filled with delight. Ling Han simply nodded in acknowledgement. Right now, he didn't have the time to greet Xiao Gu. There were few opportunities to obtain source powers of heaven and earth, so he definitely had to remain completely focused. Wang, Wang, Wang. Numerous symbols of the Great Tao started to light up on Ling Han's body, glowing at times and appearing dim at others. This was already beyond the power of the dividing soul tier. In fact, its appearance was not because Ling Han had summoned it, but rather because the indestructible Heaven Scroll was resonating with heaven and earth. The firm essence green gold also started to glow. Moreover, it was shuddering slightly, and symbols of the Great Tao also lit up on its surface. The two of them were performing some kind of communication. Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were shocked upon seeing this. This measly dividing soul tier cultivator actually possessed the ability to obtain the firm essence green gold. This was far too unfathomable. Brother Che, go and kill that brat, Lan Tianyang said. I'll hold this person back. Obtaining this source power of heaven and earth was a critical matter for the sect. Otherwise, Lan Tianyang wouldn't have guarded this place for several million years. Thus, he definitely couldn't allow Ling Han to obtain the firm essence green gold. If he failed, he would suffer severe punishment from the sect. I'm on it, Che Yuanhua replied. He turned around to charge at Ling Han. He only needed to unleash a single strike. Ya! Xiao Gu exclaimed as he reached over to block Che Yuanhua. Damn it! Lan Tianyang cursed. Xiao Gu was more powerful than him, and his defenses were also incredible. In fact, he would seem unscathed even after suffering an attack head-on. Lan Tianyang hurriedly composed himself and launched another ferocious attack at Xiao Gu. He had to hold Xiao Gu back no matter what. Boom! 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 The three elites were engaged in an intense battle. One of them wanted to break free to dispose of Ling Han, while another was attempting to stop Xiao Gu. Meanwhile, Xiao Gu was trying to stop the person who was trying to attack Ling Han. This was indeed a vicious and complicated battle. Elsewhere, Ling Han remained completely focused on trying to obtain the firm essence green gold. He trusted Xiao Gu, and he believed that Xiao Gu could definitely hold the two people back. However, was obtaining a source power of heaven and earth an easy matter? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Sure enough, Xiao Gu didn't betray Ling Han's trust. He successfully held Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang back, preventing them from launching even a single attack at Ling Han. Wang wang wang. The vibration of the firm essence green gold became increasingly intense. Countless symbols materialized on its surface, intertwining at an indescribable speed. These were clearly displays of the most valuable Tao of metal, yet none of them could manage to comprehend or capture it. At some point in time, the firm essence green gold suddenly shot toward Ling Han. Damn it! Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were shocked upon seeing this. The firm essence green gold was about to be obtained by Ling Han. Humph! Che Yuanhua roared in anger, facing an attack of Xiao Gu head-on as he finally found an opportunity to break free.
He immediately launched a palm strike at Ling Han. This strike was slightly astray as Che Yuanhua had been affected by Xiao Gu. However, it could still scrape Ling Han. This attack was equivalent to that of an ascending origin tier elite, so just how devastating was it? Even if one were only scraped by this attack, they might still be killed by its vast and terrifying power. Pooh! Ling Han was instantly obliterated into a cloud of blood. Boom! A burst of flames erupted, and the firm essence green gold immediately disappeared into this ball of blazing flames. Chapter 2026 Harvest. A look of disdain spread across Che Yuanhua's face. Was this measly dividing soul tier cultivator worthy of fighting for a treasure with them? What a joke! Bad person! Xiao Gu roared in fury. He immediately threw a vicious punch. Che Yuanhua had no time to retrieve Ling Han's dropped treasures. Ling Han definitely possessed rare treasures. Otherwise, how could a dividing soul tier cultivator have escaped their detection? However, Xiao Gu's attacks were far too overwhelming, so he had to deal with them first. He had been struck by Xiao Gu just then, and he could still feel the pain of that strike deep in his bones. Boom! Flames curled through the surroundings, and a paramount aura started to permeate. Damn it! This is the immortal phoenix tribes rising from the ashes. Lan Tianyang exclaimed in astonishment. *T. Che Yuanhua's expression also changed drastically. However, could he still attack Ling Han at this moment? No, this was simply impossible. Xiao Gu was already unleashing a wave of frenzied attacks. Boom, boom, boom. The symbols on his celestial bones started to dazzle, causing his battle prowess to rise explosively. His attacks were so ferocious that Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were reduced to an extremely disheveled state. They could barely protect themselves, so how could they possibly attack Ling Han? This was unless they were willing to exchange a life for a life. However, sacrificing a 9th Lotus Elite in order to kill a dividing soul tier cultivator? What an absolute joke. Boom! Flames flickered and danced, transforming into a colossal phoenix that quickly crumbled and vanished. From amid the raging flames, a young man walked forth. Was this not Ling Han? Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang looked over, only to see the firm essence green gold vanishing into Ling Han's chest. That was clearly an unbelievably tough piece of metal, yet at this moment, it was as fluid as water. Damn it! Damn it! Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang roared in frustration. However, so what if Ling Han had obtained the source power of heaven and earth? As long as they captured him, their supremely powerful sect master could naturally extract the source power of heaven and earth. That being the case, they would kill Xiao Gu first. The two elites exchanged a glance, and they could both see the resolution in each other's eyes. They unleashed a loud roar. Wang! The lotus between their brows bloomed, upon which a giant lotus also materialized behind their backs. The lotuses swayed slightly, and as they resonated, the two stone statues before the ancient castle instantly bestowed them with even more power, raising the battle prowess of the two elites. However, activating this technique clearly came at a cost. Streaks of blood appeared on the elites' faces, necks, hands, and wherever else Ling Han could see. Their skin split apart, and blood gushed forth. It was as if their skin were about to split open and be shed from their bodies. They started to launch a ferocious counterattack, and they were intent on suppressing and killing Xiao Gu. Upon seeing Ling Han come back to life, Xiao Gu's rage instantly subsided by a significant amount. Along with it, his battle prowess also fell by a significant amount. With him becoming weaker and the two elites becoming stronger, their battle prowess suddenly became very evenly matched. In fact, Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyuan even enjoyed a slight edge. However, Xiao Gu's physique was indeed very powerful. One had to realize that his body wasn't real, and it was actually something that he had summoned. Thus, it wouldn't matter even if his body were obliterated. In reality, he was only a single bone. As long as his celestial bone wasn't broken, he wouldn't be killed. In fact, this was most likely the bone of a celestial king, a high-level celestial king. Thus, could it be broken by two ascending origin tier elites?
Ling Han wasn't worried about Xiao Gu at all. Right now, he was fusing together with the source power of heaven and earth, and this was causing a tremendous change in his dantian. Another source power of heaven and earth had arrived. Even though the 9 heavens flame had ventured out, the source power that it represented was still unchanged. It was still one of Ling Han's 3 source powers. After I obtain a source power of earth, I'll challenge Ji Wuming to another duel. Ling Han murmured to himself. His eyes were gleaming with fighting spirit. Now, however, he unsheathed his divine demon sword. There was so much godly metal here, so how could he waste it? The divine demon sword's appetite was instantly aroused, and it started to voraciously devour the surrounding godly metal. Wang! The regulations of metal were continuously absorbed by the divine demon sword, and it was as if the sword were being reforged. Incredible! Soar to the level of celestial tool. Ling Han knew that he was dreaming. However, this wouldn't affect anyone, would it? Boom! The battle between Xiao Gu and the 2 elites became increasingly intense and violent. In fact, the cave was now filled with countless small dents. Their battle continued to drag on. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The earth quaked and mountains shook, and even Ling Han couldn't withstand the shock waves of their battle anymore. He had no choice but to retreat into the Black Tower. However, he left the divine demon sword outside, where it could continue to absorb the essence of metal. After around 7 days, the essence of metal in the surroundings was almost completely exhausted. This was easily observed from the battle between the 3 elites. Instead of just small dents, they could now blast giant craters in the surrounding cave walls. In fact, seawater was flowing in from some of the craters, and this was tangible evidence of just how ruined the surrounding area had already become. Leave! Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang suddenly leaped into the sky. However, can't you use your A*S to think for a moment? Are there truly such generous people in the world? Even if there are, do these people look like it to you? Lan Ruaji immediately leaped forward and said, Young Master Ling, enough with the nonsense. Perhaps you don't want me anymore? Ling Han involuntarily shuddered. Stop trying to disgust me. You! Lan Ruaji's slender body shuddered slightly, and her expression instantly changed. She thought extremely highly of herself, and she was convinced that she was as beautiful as a celestial maiden. In fact, all men should have been intoxicated by her beauty. Yet, Ling Han was actually treating her with such disdain. This was naturally a huge blow to her dignity, and it caused her to descend into wild fury. Junior sister, it's best that you give up on him, Xiao Jun said with a cold chuckle. His heart is filled with evil, and his actions are filled with suspicious intent. I suggest that we capture him and directly pluck his soul. Enforcement officers, please capture this person, he said to the 8th Lotus elites. I'll capture him, a middle-aged man said and stepped forward. A lotus with 8 petals suddenly materialized between his brows. This was a unique symbol of their cultivation technique, one which was usually hidden. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, Why don't you all come at me together? That way, I can save some time. You're but a measly dividing soul tier cultivator, yet you dare to speak to me with such audacity? The middle-aged man said with a sneer. To say nothing of receiving a blessing from the deity, even if he didn't, those at the 8th Lotus were still equivalent to immortal palace tier elites. As such, suppressing a dividing soul tier cultivator would be as easy as a flip of his hand. Ling Han started to accumulate power. With his strength, he naturally couldn't hope to rival an immortal palace tier elite. However, he still had an ultimate trump card. Thump, thump, thump. The middle-aged man strode over, with each of his steps giving off a deep and heavy thud that shook one's heart. He was threatening Ling Han, and he was placing pressure on Ling Han. Brat, I truly don't understand. Where is your courage coming from? The middle-aged man asked with a cold sneer. You're about to find out, Ling Han said with a grin. There was a glimmer of danger in his eyes. His cracking light sphere had already finished charging. Boom! Arcs of lightning instantly exploded into the surroundings. The middle-aged man couldn't help but sneer in disdain. This attack was indeed powerful. However, it could at most only threaten a 7th Lotus Elite. To an 8th Lotus Elite like him, such an attack wouldn't pose any threat at all. The elite activated a small portion of his defenses. Crack, crack, crack. Arcs of lighting gathered on his shield of black light, yet they were completely unable to penetrate it. This was completely expected. After all, it would be truly strange if a dividing soul tier cultivator could breach the defenses of an immortal palace elite. However, this was the cracking light sphere, and its target wasn't only the middle-aged man. Instead, this was an attack that didn't differentiate between friend and foe, and would attack everyone within its range. In fact, if Ling Han overcharged it, it might even cause damage to Ling Han himself. Thus, the arcs of violent lightning also shot toward the people in the surroundings. However, because these people were standing relatively far away, the lightning did little damage to them even if it struck them. These arcs of lightning possessed little power, so their damage could almost be completely ignored. However, was this truly the case? The middle-aged man wore a disdainful smile, and he was just about to step forward to kill Ling Han. Playtime is over, brat. Yuha! His expression changed drastically. His shield of black light was being rapidly corroded by the arcs of lightning. At the same time, screams of agony immediately sounded in the surroundings. Looking around, one could see that many people had already collapsed to the ground, with their bodies being rapidly corroded. What in the world was going on? Ling Han was only a measly dividing soul tier cultivator, so how had he unleashed an attack that could even threaten an 8th Lotus Elite? The elite was immediately plunged into a desperate situation. A vicious corrosive power was rapidly piercing through his defenses and yearning to destroy his body. At this moment, he had no option but to sit down and resist this attack with his full power. Ah! Screams of pain and misery echoed around the surroundings. However, these screams disappeared just as quickly as they had appeared. This was because the people struck by the arcs of lightning had already transformed into puddles of blood. Fuck! Chapter 2028. Blood Sacrifice. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "I never go back on my words." Xiao Jun and the others couldn't help but shudder. This was because the 8th Lotus Elite started to wail in agony as Ling Han spoke. At the same time, his body was being corroded at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. If he had resolutely abandoned his physical body at the first instance, his divine sense could have still survived. At that time, he could have looked for a new body to possess. However, he hadn't fathomed the devastating nature of the red-spotted green bamboo, and he had dared to struggle against it with his own cultivation. His decision was an act of seeking death. In just a few seconds, a mighty immortal palace tier elite had already been reduced to nothing more than a puddle of blood. Both his physical body and divine sense were annihilated. Was this not petrifying? What in the world did you do? Xiao Jun asked in a trembling voice. He had always been a calm and composed person. Even after losing to Ling Han that time, he had immediately come up with a way to deal with the situation. He had admitted his loss and minimized the questioning of his authority. Now, however, he was completely shaken by the scene before him. He couldn't calm down no matter what. That was an 8th Lotus Elite. Yet, he had actually been killed by Ling Han in a single strike. This was simply inconceivable. Ling Han wore a wide smile and he said, "You people have your deity, and I naturally have mine as well." Just then, I drew on the power of my deity. In comparison, the deity of you people is only the. In fact, I can instantly kill an elite 1 major tier above me. Sigh. He shook his head with an expression of utter disdain. Xiao Jun and the others were enraged upon hearing this. However, they couldn't say anything in retort. They couldn't argue against reality. Kill all of the outsiders. Begin a blood sacrifice. Lan Tianyong's voice suddenly traveled over. What? Everyone was shocked upon hearing this. The guests of the island were shocked because they hadn't imagined that the islanders would suddenly turn against them. After all, hadn't their relationship been cordial just a moment ago? They had fought a beast tied together, and they had even agreed to pray to the deity together. In the future they would have become like family. Meanwhile, the residents of the island were also deeply astonished. Their island master was actually going to conduct a blood sacrifice. This was their final trump card. After conducting a blood sacrifice, the two deity statues would temporarily provide one with more impressive power. However, when this blessing expired, the blessed person would immediately suffer severe wounds. Thus, this was a final trump card. With them ordering a blood sacrifice, did this mean that Lan Tianyong and Che Yuanhua were also facing grave danger?
Hurry up! What are you still standing around for?
Lan Tianyong roared. He and Che Yuanhua were already on the verge of collapse. Xiao Gu was an undying freak, so if their battle continued, they would definitely be killed. Xiao Jun and the others were immediately shaken back to their senses. They then glared at the outsiders with baleful and murderous expressions. Blood sacrifice. Such a sacrificial offering naturally needed more than just fresh blood.
It also needed life.
In reality, vitality was the most essential ingredient of a blood sacrifice. The more vitality a blood sacrifice received, the more powerful the blood sacrifice would be.
Die!
Xiao Jun and the others roared as they charged at Qin Wei and the other outsiders. However, everyone avoided Ling Han as if in tacit understanding. They didn't dare to attack him. He had killed an 8th Lotus elite with a single strike, and he had also killed a large number of other cultivators in the process. As such, who dared to attack him? In fact, they didn't even dare to approach him. They avoided him to the best of their ability. Ling Han involuntarily stroked his chin. Was he that frightening?
Ah!
The islanders launched a furious assault, and there were several 8th Lotus elites among them. These elites were equivalent to Immortal Palace tier elites. Meanwhile, Qin Wei was the only Immortal Palace tier elite among the outsiders. However, there were several 8th Lotus elites among the islanders, after all, so several outsiders were still killed and offered for sacrifice by them. Che Yuanhua's and Lan Tianyong's battle prowess instantly rose by an explosive amount. However, this still wasn't enough. Even after all of the outsiders had been killed, their battle prowess was still insufficient to suppress Xiao Gu.
More! Sacrifice more!
Lan Tianyong yelled in a shrill voice.
Sacrifice more? Whom could they still kill?
Ling Han was the only remaining outsider. To say nothing of whether they could kill him, even if they could, a single person wouldn't make much difference to the blood sacrifice. That being the case, whom did Lan Tianyong want them to kill? They could only kill their own members. Xiao Jun's expression became ice-cold and he roared, "You heard, Island Master!" Several 8th Lotus elites instantly lashed out, mercilessly killing those beside them.
Pu.
One after another, numerous heads flew into the sky, signifying the continuation of the blood sacrifice. Chapter 2029. All killed. Following Lan Tianyong's command for more sacrifices, 100 or so islanders were immediately killed. The surroundings became a sea of blood. The blood sacrifice resumed, and Che Yuanhua's and Lan Tianyong's battle prowess instantly soared again. They finally managed to suppress Xiao Gu. Earth-locking technique. They roared in unison. Wisps of black air flowed from their fingertips, transforming into lengths of thread that wrapped around Xiao Gu, and preventing him from moving freely. It didn't matter that they couldn't kill him. As long as they could capture him, they could take him away and bring him before more powerful elites. At that time, they would be able to thoroughly exterminate this great threat. Xiao Gu fought and struggled, yet he was unable to break free. "There's also this brat," Lan Tianyong said as he turned around. He glared at Ling Han. They had to capture Ling Han and bring him back to their sect as well. After all, he possessed a source power of heaven and earth, and this was something that their sect master had specifically asked them to obtain.
"I'll capture him,"
Che Yuanhua said as he strode toward Ling Han. He was a 9th Lotus Elite, which was equivalent to being an ascending origin tier elite. With a single thought, he could kill Ling Han several times over. Ling Han smiled and said, "I suggest you look after yourselves first." Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang turned around to look at Xiao Gu, only to see a wisp of light shining within him. This light then transformed into a dazzling symbol. Whoosh! The symbol flew out from Xiao Gu's body, instantly obliterating the black threads around him with an overwhelming force. Xiao Gu regained his freedom. Yeah! He was enraged, and he launched a flurry of vicious attacks at Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang again. This time, he more so retrieved a bone from his body. This bone was his true body, and there was a Celestial King tier symbol dazzling atop it. This bone could be viewed as a celestial tool, one which possessed a devastating might. With a single attack it could shatter heaven and earth. Rumble! One after another, numerous celestial bodies started to rain down from the sky. These were meteors that were as large as mountains. How could Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang block this? They weren't struck, yet just the shock waves emitted by these meteors caused them to cough blood as they retreated in disarray. They couldn't block this power at all. Xiao Gu was unleashing a divine might, and this was a completely unstoppable force. Retreat! Hurry up and retreat! Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang immediately turned around to retreat without regard for anything else. Right now, they were facing the full might of a celestial tool. How could they hope to rival it? However, they were still too slow. Xiao Gu wielded that bone, which was dazzling with celestial light. Boom! In just a short moment, one of Che Yuanhua's arms was severed by the celestial light. Meanwhile, Lan Tianyang had already lost a leg. They appeared as miserable as could be. However, to these two elites, such wounds were completely acceptable. As long as they managed to flee, they could still regenerate their severed arms and legs. It was a pity that Xiao Gu wouldn't give them such a chance. He was unstoppable as he swung his Celestial King bone. Ling Han also didn't rest, and he started to launch a flurry of vicious attacks at Xiao Jun and the others. He had to complete his job of exterminating evil. Ah! The agonized wails of Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang were incessant. The power of a Celestial King had already been unleashed, so how could they measly 9th Lotus elites hope to block it? Death was their only fate. Xiao Gu was filled with vicious rage, and after killing Che Yuanhua and Lan Tianyang, he immediately turned his attention to the other islanders. Otherwise, if he had participated in that ceremony and offered his soul to the deity, he would have definitely been killed by Xiao Gu at this moment. In any case, Qin Wei's expression was extremely grim at this moment. His eyes were filled with terror as he looked at Xiao Gu. "Xiao Gu, long time no see," Ling Han said with a loud laugh. "Yeah." Xiao Gu's vicious aura instantly vanished, and he flashed an innocent smile at Ling Han. "Xiao Gu, long time no see." "Fine, he's being a parrot again." Ling Han shook his head and asked, "Xiao Gu, how did you come to the Celestial Realm?" "Xiao Gu, how did you come to the Celestial Realm?" Xiao Gu repeated. "Holy! How long has it been? You still haven't learned to talk yet? How has your strength grown so rapidly?" Ling Han asked. He wasn't willing to give up. "How has your strength grown so rapidly?" Sigh. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh. Xiao Gu also sighed in reply. Sigh. Ling Han pondered for a moment, and he decided that it was only normal that Xiao Gu had come to the Celestial Realm. After reaching a certain level of strength, he could naturally shatter the gates to the Celestial Realm. However, the rapid growth of his power was still far too astonishing. Thinking about it carefully, however, Xiao Gu wasn't a human, and he was only a bone. Thus, he naturally didn't face any barriers in advancing cultivation level. Ling Han pushed these thoughts from his mind. "Xiao Gu, oh Xiao Gu, how can I communicate with you?" Ling Han really wanted to know what Xiao Gu had experienced during his lifetime. He had definitely been a Celestial King, so how had he died? Moreover, he still detested these cultivators of the other system with such passion after dying. Just what had he experienced before? It was a shame that Xiao Gu only knew how to say, "Yaya," or be a parrot. He couldn't express his own thoughts at all. Should he wait for Lu Herong? Ling Han removed the formation over the island. This way, Lu Herong wouldn't miss it when she passed by. However, perhaps Lu Herong had already examined this region before. With her confidence as a celestial king, she naturally wouldn't examine the region a second time. In any case, Ling Han would wait for now. At this moment, he was extremely interested in the two stone statues. Pa! However, Ling Han's eyes immediately widened in astonishment. This was because Xiao Gu didn't give him any chance to investigate the two statues. Upon seeing them, he immediately lashed out to destroy them. Yaya! Xiao Gu was extremely proud, and as he looked at Ling Han, it was as if he were asking for praise. Holy crap! Right now, Ling Han only had himself to blame. He hadn't told Xiao Gu beforehand, and he should have known that Xiao Gu had an immense dislike for evil. There was nothing he could do about this. It was time to leave the island. Ling Han chopped wood to make a boat, and Qin Wei was also doing the same thing. However, he didn't dare to approach Ling Han and Xiao Gu. Instead, he hid far away, and he worked hard by himself. Meanwhile, Ling Han also let the Empress and the others out from the Black Tower. The Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden had both seen Xiao Gu before, so they weren't surprised by his presence. However, Hunyao and Bewitching Maiden Ro were both astonished upon seeing him. Shi Lei and Shi Yu more so started to exclaim in surprise, shouting about how they had two stepfathers. Ha! Why do you look the same as Niu's Ling Han? Hunyao asked as she looked Xiao Gu up and down. Ha! Why do you look the same as Niu's Ling Han? Xiao Gu instantly became excited upon seeing so many new people. Why are you so strange? Not only are you copying someone else's appearance, but you're even copying other people's words. Why are you? So fun! So fun! There was a glimmer in Hunyao's eyes, and it was clear that she was enjoying playing around with Xiao Gu. Even though Ling Han wasn't a skilled craftsman, he still managed to construct a boat after a day of work. This boat was only around 3 meters long, and it was only around 1 meter wide. In any case, it only needed to hold 1 or 2 people. After all, there was still the Black Tower. Ling Han and Xiao Gu boarded the boat. Meanwhile, the others returned inside the Black Tower. Chapter 2030. Reaching the Western Celestial Realm. They had arrived at the Western Celestial Realm. Ling Han immediately felt the difference of this place. Compared to the Eastern Celestial Realm, the spiritual qi here was far more concentrated. Because of this, the spiritual herbs and celestial medicines in the Western Celestial Realm were of higher quality and more abundant than those in the Eastern Celestial Realm. It was no wonder that the overall level of cultivation in the Western Celestial Realm was superior. Their environment was already better. Ling Han turned to Hunyao and asked, "Niao, where's the Rock Palace?" "Huh." Hunyao blinked and replied, "The Rock Palace is naturally where the Rock Palace is." Ling Han grimaced and asked, "So you don't know where your home is?" "Niao doesn't need to know," Hunyao said. However, this was indeed expected. With this glutton's personality, how could she care about her surroundings? She would be satisfied as long as she could eat and play. Fine. There's clearly a member of the Rock Palace here, yet we have absolutely no clue about where the Rock Palace is located. Then we can only ask someone. They disembarked from the ship and continued to journey forward. A lush forest appeared before them, and their eyes lit up upon seeing it. Gazing at the unchanging sea had been far too boring. Now that they could see some greenery, they naturally felt completely refreshed. Let's look for the nearest city. We can then ask around and find the way to the Rock Palace. They set off in some direction, and they were convinced that they would eventually come across a city. 7 days later. Rumble. The earth suddenly started to quake, and it was as if there were an earthquake. Ling Han looked over, only to see a wave rushing toward them. No. This wasn't a wave. Instead, it was an army. They were either marching forward or in the process of fleeing. In any case, they were lightning quick, and there were mountain-like elephants charging alongside them. There were also rocks with a wingspan of several thousand meters soaring through the sky, and there were many armored warriors wielding their spears as they danced in the air. There were numerous elites among them, and they were all radiating with extremely terrifying auras. With so many of them together, their advance naturally caused the earth to quake. It was as if heaven and earth were about to collapse. This was a fleeing army. Ling Han determined this after observing them for a brief moment. After all, ordinary armies wouldn't abandon their armor and weapons. Moreover, they wouldn't be carrying such a large number of wounded warriors, and their morale wouldn't be so low. There was a flag among them, and Ling Han saw the moon-shaped symbol on this flag. This flag was being held by a golden giant that measured 30 meters in height. The army quickly arrived before them before hurriedly soaring over their heads. Of course, there were also many war horses that sprinted past them. In fact, several of them almost crashed into Ling Han and the others. "You guys, hurry up and turn around," some passing soldier said. "Be careful not to lose your life." What do they mean? A thought suddenly occurred to Ling Han and he shouted, "Fuck! They're still being pursued." "Haha! Since you know, hurry up and flee," a soldier said with a loud laugh. Ling Han was exasperated and he could only say, "Follow me." He didn't want to use the Black Tower before so many people. Moreover, he didn't want to rely on the Black Tower every time he came across some danger. Ling Han and the others also turned around to flee. However, because they had reacted too slowly, they were now stuck at the very back of the fleeing army. Glancing back, they could see another wave, surging over from the distance. That was also a huge army, and they were carrying another flag with them. This flag was decorated with the word, "Do." Sure enough, one army was fleeing, while the other army was pursuing. Fuck! Why do I always come across these situations? Ling Han sprinted as fast as he could, and the Empress and the others all followed behind him. They all felt extremely frustrated. Only Hunyeo was giggling, finding this situation extremely interesting. Meanwhile, Xiaogu wore a naive and adorable expression. As long as there was no enemy, he would be in this indifferent state. One army was fleeing, while another army was pursuing. A battle had clearly been fought just then, and the army with the moon flag had been defeated. Thus they were fleeing. Behind them, the victorious army was relentlessly giving chase. This pursuit lasted for a whopping 15 days, at which time the pursuing army finally stopped and gave up on the chase. The fleeing army finally managed to catch a breath, no longer needing to advance in such disarray. During these 15 days, Ling Han also became quite familiar with these people. This army belonged to the moon-plucking Celestial King, and it was referred to as the moon-plucking army. Of course, this was only one of the many armies under the flag of the moon-plucking army. Meanwhile, their opponent had been the refined Cloud army, which belonged to the refined Cloud Celestial King. These two Celestial Kings controlled neighboring territories, so it wasn't unusual for large-scale battles to break out between them. War naturally ended with victors and losers. This time, the moon-plucking Celestial King had suffered a small loss. Of course, neither the moon-plucking Celestial King nor the refined Cloud Celestial King had participated in this battle. The two armies were simply led by the generals under them. During this time, Ling Han had also asked around for the Rock Palace's whereabouts. However, even though these people had heard of the Rock Palace, they weren't sure about where exactly it was located. The Eastern Celestial Realm was large, yet the Western Celestial Realm was even larger. The Eastern Celestial Realm possessed 33 heavens, while the Western Celestial Realm possessed 99 heavens. It was 3 times larger. For ordinary people, it would already be extremely impressive if they had traveled to the nearby 3 or 4 heavens before. Thus, if the Rock Palace were located 6 or 7 heavens away, it was indeed very difficult for these people to know where it was located. Perhaps the moon-plucking Celestial King would know. However, could Ling Han ask the moon-plucking Celestial King about such trivial matters? In fact, he wouldn't even be able to meet the Celestial King. Ling Han felt extremely annoyed. They had clearly arrived at the Western Celestial Realm already, yet he felt like he had become a fool. He had no clue where to go next. Since that's the case, Let's follow this army first, the Empress suggested. This was their only option. They would settle here first, and then they would make a plan for the future. This army was fairly friendly, and they didn't shoo Ling Han and the others away. They allowed them to travel together. 7 days later, the army finally arrived at their encampment. Ling Han and the others weren't allowed to enter, so they could only separate ways here. The soldiers gave them some guidance, and after walking north for around 3 days, a large city eventually appeared before them. We don't know where the Rock Palace is, but what about the Alchemy Holy Land or whatnot? Ling Han stroked his chin in thought. He should have come to the Western Celestial Realm with Ma Tongguang 1,000 years ago. However, Ma Tongguang had been killed, and he had thus lost his guide. At that time, he had also been lazy, so he hadn't studied much about the Western Celestial Realm. I remember Master calling that place the Universal Peace Heaven or something. Although the time has long passed, as the representative of the Eastern Celestial Realm, I should still go even if I'm late. Fine. Then our first stop will be the Universal Peace Heaven. Moreover, alchemists are involved in business with customers from all places, so it's extremely likely that they know the whereabouts of the Rock Palace. We'll rest for a while and then immediately set off. Ling Han made a decision, and the others naturally wouldn't oppose it. They decided to rest in this city for a few days, where they would also replenish their food supply and other necessities. They would then set off for the Universal Peace Heaven. The Western Celestial Realm had many local specialties, and spiritual herbs were one of these. Many spiritual herbs that were rare in the Eastern Celestial Realm were common goods here, and they were more so as cheap as dirt.